Right, so if you're here, you've probably seen The Simpsons. I'm going to assume that. I'm not going to walk through what the show is, who's in it, or how the family is yellow and lives in a place called Springfield. Because if you don't know any of that, you almost certainly wouldn't have clicked on a 3-hour video about hidden details from it. You're a fan, or at least you're someone who finds the show comforting enough to fall asleep to. Either of those works for me, honestly. Both, ideally. So here's what we're doing tonight. Over the next few hours, I'm going to walk through somewhere around 100 details about The Simpsons that the average viewer has probably missed or never really thought about. Some of them are little visual gags hiding in the background of episodes. Some of them are stories about how the show actually got made, which is, to be fair, almost more interesting than the show itself in places. Some of them are about the voice cast, who are absolute geniuses, by the way, and the strange little quirks of how they ended up in their roles. There are a few predictions because we have to talk about the predictions, although I'll be honest about which of those are real and which are basically just internet exaggerations. There's a bit about the writers, who turn out to be one of the most peculiar collections of humans ever assembled in a room together. There's a chalkboard message in which Bart, in writing, admits that he's voiced by a 32-year-old woman. There's a character on the show who turned out to be the wrong color because of a fax machine. There's a hidden movie inside the show. There's a writer who refuses to be photographed. There's at least one episode that quietly disappeared from circulation and never came back. And there's a lot of small, lovely details that none of us were ever supposed to notice, but somehow did anyway. The point of all this isn't really to teach you anything. The point is just to have something pleasant playing in the background while you drift off. I always find these videos easier to listen to when the host isn't trying too hard, so I'm not going to. I'm going to talk about a show I genuinely like, share details I find interesting, and trust that you'll either stay awake for the bits you care about or fall asleep at some point and miss the rest. Either is completely fine. If you fall asleep around detail 22 and never hear about Conan O'Brien writing the monorail song, that's okay. The episode will still be there in the morning, or in another video. Whatever works. A few ground rules just so you know what to expect. There's no big reveal at the end. There's no stay tuned for the most shocking one thing happening here. It doesn't build to anything. The structure is more like a long, meandering conversation than a documentary with a thesis. Sections sit next to each other, not on top of each other. You can drop in anywhere. You can wake up halfway through and not feel lost. And nothing I say in the back half of the video is going to make more sense if you sat through the front half. It's just a long walk. I'm also not going to be doing the dramatic narrator voice. I never really understood that. We're just chatting. If you want to subscribe to the channel, the button is somewhere on your screen, and I'd very much appreciate it, especially if these long sleep ones are working for you. But that's the only time I'm bringing it up. Once done, never mentioned again. The rest of the video is the actual video, right? The Simpsons, just so we've got the scale set. The show has been on the air since the 17th of December, 1989. 36 seasons in the can as of where we are right now, with the show renewed through at least season 40, which carries it deep into the late 20s. Roughly 788 episodes, give or take whichever Disney Plus exclusive shorts you count or don't count, depending on your mood. That makes it the longest-running American sitcom, the longest-running American animated series, and the longest-running scripted primetime series in television history. Full stop, period. By the time anything that's airing now becomes someone's nostalgic memory, The Simpsons will probably still be on. It is, at this point, less a television show and more an institution that happens to be funny most of the time. And in all those years, the writers, the animators, the voice cast, and the showrunners have quietly buried so much weird material into the background of episodes that you could re-watch the entire series start to finish and still miss things, which is part of what makes it satisfying to talk about. There are throwaway gags from 1991 that fans only spotted properly in 2018. There are character details that even the people who made the show didn't fully realize were going to become a thing. There are entire layered jokes that only work if you happen to have a degree in mathematics. There are guest stars hiding behind pseudonyms. There are entire alternate endings that only escaped onto a special tied to a 1995 cliffhanger and then quietly went away. The show has more buried treasure in its background than any other piece of television I can think of, and we're going to spend the next few hours just walking through some of it. Now, before we start, a small note. Some of these details are well known, some are obscure. I'm not going to rank them, I'm not going to save the best for last. That kind of structure is the opposite of what we're doing here. I'm just going to take them roughly in clumps, theme by theme, going from the show's origin, through the animation, through the voices, through the writing, through the predictions, and so on, until we wind down at the end. You'll know we're getting close to the end when I start saying goodnight. Other than that, no signposts. I should also say this is a video for fans, but it's also a video for the slightly curious. If you're not a Simpsons obsessive, you should be able to follow everything I say. I'm not going to drop episode numbers without context. I'm not going to assume you know every character. When I mention someone like Sideshow Bob or Mr. Burns, I'll do a small amount of work to remind you who they are if it matters. The whole point is that this should be relaxing, not exhausting. I'm not testing you, I'm just talking. And if you're a proper hardcore fan who already knows half this stuff, that's fine too. Skip the ones you already know in your head. Doze through them. Wait for the ones that surprise you. Some of these details are obscure enough that even people who've watched every episode multiple times don't necessarily know them. I'd put the Fax Machine Smithers story in that category, and the John Swartzwelder Booth story in the hidden movie one. Those tend to surprise even the obsessives, so get comfortable. Pillows, blankets, room temperature, all of that is your business. If you've got a phone in your hand, the best move is probably to flip it over so the screen doesn't keep you awake. If you wake up at 3 in the morning to me talking about Apartment 305 or the Krusty equals Homer theory, that's the desired outcome. That means it worked. That's what I'm aiming for. Right then, let's start with how the show almost didn't happen, because that's a story I personally never get tired of. One of my favorite stories about this show is that the whole thing started because Matt Groening got nervous in a hallway. That's it. That's the origin story. A guy waiting in a producer's office, fidgeting, eventually pulling out a pen because he had nothing else to do. Here's roughly what happened, as Groening has told it himself in various interviews and as he explained to Smithsonian Magazine a few years back. He was a cartoonist in Los Angeles. His main thing at the time was a comic strip called Life in Hell, which featured a couple of grumpy, anthropomorphic rabbits and had a pretty devoted following in alternative newspapers. James L. Brooks, who was already a huge name in television, was a fan. Brooks had seen the strip, liked it, and wanted Groening to adapt it into short, animated bumpers for the Tracey Ullman Show. Bumpers, if you've never heard the term, are the little bits of content that play between scenes to break up a sketch show, not a major creative gig. But it would put Groening's work on television, and the rate was good, so Groening went to the meeting. And while he was sitting in the lobby of Brooks's office, allegedly for over an hour, he started getting cold feet about handing over the rights to his rabbits. The rabbits were his thing. If he gave Fox the rights to Life in Hell and the show went bad, he'd lose his only commercially valuable creation. So he did something quite practical, which was to invent a new family on the spot. He pulled out a pen and sketched 5 characters, gave them names, and walked into the meeting with an entirely different pitch from the one he'd been invited there to give. The names came from his own family. His father is named Homer, his mother is named Margaret, which becomes Marge. His sisters are Lisa and Maggie. The one name he didn't use was his own because he thought it would be too on the nose. So for the troublemaking 10-year-old son, he came up with Bart, which he said in interviews was meant to be an anagram of brat, and also reminded him of a barking dog. He liked the idea of an angry father yelling "Bart" out the back door and it sounding like a man calling a dog. That's the level we're operating at here. The most famous animated kid in television history is named essentially because the syllable sounded like a dog. I love that, actually. The whole thing is just a stressed out guy in a waiting room making it up. The short started airing on the Tracey Ullman Show on the 19th of April, 1987. 48 of them ran over about 2 years. If you've never seen them, the Tracey Ullman version of the family is quite different from what we'd recognize today. The animation is rough, the voices aren't quite right yet. Bart's voice is a higher pitch, more whiny, less of the world-weary smartass he becomes. Homer's closer to a growling everyman than the lovable idiot we know. Maggie is just Maggie. She doesn't really have anything to do yet. The shorts are basically little vignettes about the family's home life, set almost entirely in their living room, with very little of what we'd later think of as the Simpsons world. Springfield doesn't exist yet. The town is just a place these people live, and we never go anywhere else. But the shorts did well, and Brooks pushed for the family to get their own half-hour show. This is where the production story gets surprisingly tense for a show that ended up becoming the most watched cartoon in television history. Fox at the time was the fourth network, the new network, the one nobody really took seriously. Sitcoms were not their strong suit. The idea of building a Sunday night primetime show around an animated family with crude artwork and a punky kid as the lead character was, by 1989 standards, mad. It almost didn't get made. The reason it got made comes down to a couple of really specific power moves by James L. Brooks. Brooks had a 4-picture deal in active negotiation with Fox at exactly the time The Simpsons pilot was being discussed. He'd already directed several extremely profitable films for the studio. He was, as one Fox executive put it, their huge, shining star. Fox absolutely needed to close that film deal. So Brooks's lawyer reportedly walked into the negotiation and said, more or less, you can have your film deal if you greenlight The Simpsons. That's it. That was the leverage. The show exists because James L. Brooks held his own movie career hostage in exchange for getting an animated family on the air. There's a smaller but quite funny piece of the same negotiation. Garth Ancier, who was the founding entertainment president of Fox at the time, has talked publicly about how he told a small lie to push the deal over the line. He told Barry Diller, who was running Fox and who Ancier himself describes as the one guy at the company you don't lie to, that ABC had supposedly offered The Simpsons a 6-episode order. ABC hadn't. ABC didn't even know about the show. But Ancier says he made it up to create urgency, and Diller, who probably saw through it instantly, went along with it anyway because he liked the idea. Honestly, the story I find more revealing here is the Diller one. He clearly knew it was a lie. He just let it work because he could feel the show was worth gambling on. That's how television used to get made, apparently. 2 men in a room, both knowing one of them was making things up, and both deciding it didn't matter. Now, there's a name in the show's history that doesn't get said as often as Groening and Brooks, and I think it's worth pausing on. Sam Simon. Sam Simon was the third co-developer of the show, brought in by Brooks and Groening to actually build the writing room and shape the show's comedic sensibility. He ran the first 4 seasons. The Simpsons we all love, the early 90s version of the show that's universally considered the golden age, that's largely Sam Simon's work. He's the one who assembled the original writing staff. He's the one who pushed for the show to be character first, with the jokes growing out of who the people were rather than being plopped in from outside. Groening had the vision and the look. Brooks had the prestige and the leverage. Simon had the actual sensibility of the show. He left after season 4 over creative differences and a deeply broken personal relationship with the rest of the team. But his contract was such that he kept an executive producer credit and a profit share for the rest of his life. He died in March of 2015. He's one of those figures in television history who deserves about 3 times as much credit as he gets, and I'd encourage anyone who's curious to look up his story properly when you're awake. There's a real human being behind a lot of what made this show what it was, and his name barely gets brought up. Now, here's a fun fact I think is genuinely lovely. The episode that was supposed to be the very first Simpsons episode to air, the planned series premiere, was called Some Enchanted Evening. It was the episode where Homer and Marge go out on a date and leave the kids with a babysitter who turns out to be a wanted criminal. It was supposed to be the introduction of this family to America, and the animation came back from the overseas studio in such bad shape that the producers were genuinely worried it would tank the show before it even started. The colors were off, characters looked weird, sequences didn't quite match the storyboard. Klasky Chupo, the studio doing the animation back then, did their best, but the workflow was new and the show looked rougher than they could live with. So the producers shelved Some Enchanted Evening, brought a Christmas episode forward in the schedule, and the show's actual premiere ended up being Simpsons Roasting on an Open Fire. That's the one with the Christmas tree and Santa's little helper getting adopted. It aired on the 17th of December, 1989, which is now the official birthday of the show. Some Enchanted Evening did eventually air, much later in the first season after the animation got cleaned up. But by then, it didn't really matter because the world had already met the family on Christmas Eve. The premiere itself was a quiet sensation. Roughly 26.7 million viewers tuned in, which for a brand new animated series on the fledgling Fox network was an enormous number. Some sources put the figure lower, at around 13.4 million, but that's probably the household figure rather than total viewers. Either way, it was more than anyone at Fox had expected, and it set the tone for what was about to happen, which was a few years of absolute pandemonium around this show, the early 90s Bartmania era that we'll get to later. Here's a small detail I find quietly charming. Bart was originally supposed to be the star of the show. The early seasons are very much Bart-centric. The merchandise was Bart-centric. The early t-shirts that were sold and bootlegged and banned from American schools were almost all Bart. He was the breakout, the face of the franchise, the kid on the lunchbox. For the first few years, the show was effectively about a misbehaving boy and the family around him. Then something quietly shifted. Around season 6 or 7, the producers noticed that the fan mail was changing. Bart was still getting his share. But more and more of the letters were addressed to Homer. People were writing in not just to say they liked the character, but to say things like, "You make me feel better about my life. You're an inspiration." Grown men were writing fan letters to a cartoon dad about how he made them feel okay about being themselves. That, more than any creative decision, shifted the gravitational center of the show. From around the middle of the run onward, Homer became the lead. The episodes more often revolved around him. The plots increasingly used his appetite, his ineptitude, his strange wisdom, his tragic moments as the engine of the story. Brian Volk-Weiss, who directed a documentary about all this called Icons Unearthed, has talked about how this happened. The producers were paying attention to the mail, they read it, they saw what was working, and they adjusted. That's a remarkable thing for a show as huge as this one to do, especially with the kind of long lead times animation requires. You're already 2 seasons ahead of yourself in production at any given moment. The fact that they could pivot at all, slowly, naturally, over the course of a few years, says a lot about the people running the room. And one last thing for this section, just because I think it's worth saying out loud. The original conceit Groening had for the show was darker and weirder than what made it to air. The Simpsons we know is satirical and quite warm, even at its most cynical. It loves its characters, it loves Springfield. The version that existed in the very earliest pitch documents was reportedly meaner, more nihilistic, closer in spirit to Life in Hell with its grumpy rabbits than to the family sitcom Brooks shaped it into. There's nothing wrong with what we got, obviously. The world that exists got us decades of one of the greatest pieces of television ever made. But it's interesting to think that another version was on the table, and someone, probably some combination of Brooks and Simon, decided that the satire would land harder if the family genuinely cared about each other underneath all of it. They were right. That decision is, in a quiet way, the most important creative choice the show ever made. All right, that's how the show got here. Now let's talk a bit about why everyone in it is yellow. The yellow thing is one of those decisions that feels deliberate but really wasn't exactly. Or rather, it was deliberate, but the reasoning is a lot more practical than people assume. The color was proposed by Gabor Supo, who along with his then-wife Arlene Klasky ran the animation studio that handled the first 3 seasons of the show. He, Klasky, and Groening were sitting around trying to decide on a palette for the family, and Chupo's argument was essentially this. You're competing for attention in a world where people have remote controls. When a viewer is flipping through channels, you have maybe half a second to make them pause. You need a color that pops, a color that nobody else is using on television, a color bright enough that even on a small, fuzzy 1989 CRT screen, it would jump out. Yellow does that. Yellow is a color the human eye is actually wired to notice quickly. It's the color of caution signs and school buses and warning labels for exactly that reason. So they went with yellow, and the rest of the casting on the show was effectively built around that decision. There's a fun detail to this. Groening apparently held out for a bit because he wanted the family to look more naturalistic, but Chupo's argument won. The story goes that the moment they all saw the test artwork rendered in yellow, that was it. There was no going back. The family was now irreversibly the color of butter. Right. Now let me tell you the Smithers story, because this is one of those bits of behind-the-scenes lore that genuinely changed the show by accident. If you've watched Smithers across the run of the series, you'll know he's normally yellow, like everyone else. But if you go back and look at his very first proper appearance in the 2nd episode of the show, he's not yellow. He's African American. He's clearly a black character. The colorist gave him brown skin, and that's what shows up on screen. It's a continuity error that fans noticed almost immediately, and that became one of the show's strangest little quirks. The reason it happened, as Brian Volk-Weiss explains in the Icons Unearthed documentary, is the fax machine. I am not making this up. The American studio, Klasky Supo, did the high-level work and then sent the panels overseas to a studio in Korea for the labor-intensive in-between animation, the coloring, the actual painting of frames. The way the color notes got from California to Seoul was by fax. The faxes weren't in color, they were black and white reproductions of the artwork with little arrows pointing at each character and handwritten notes saying things like yellow skin, blue hair. Routine stuff. But faxes in the late 80s were not exactly precision instruments. If anything in the machine moved while the paper was going through, the image would smudge. And on one particular panel, the note next to Smithers got smudged. The Korean studio couldn't read what color he was supposed to be, and rather than send it back and lose another week, they just made a guess. They guessed wrong. They colored him in as a black man. By the time the producers in California received the finished tape and put it in the VCR for review, the episode was already done. They didn't have the money or the time to redo it. So Smithers was a black character for exactly one episode. After that, he was redrawn correctly. And the show, in true Simpsons fashion, never really addressed it. The show just absorbed the mistake and moved on, like it absorbs everything. If you go back and watch that early episode now, you can spot the gag in real time. He's just a different person. Let's talk about hair for a second, because there's a tiny detail here that breaks my brain a little once I learned it. The kids on the show, Bart and Lisa and Maggie, don't have hairlines. There is no line on their heads that separates their skin from their hair. The hair and the head are one continuous shape. Their hair points stick out of the same yellow flesh as the rest of their face, and the color just changes where it changes. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. It's like the four-finger thing, which I'll come back to in a moment. Tiny design economy that you absorb without noticing for years. Now, Homer's head. There's a famous detail that's been talked about so many times by now that I'm a little embarrassed to bring it up. But this is a sleep video, so the assumption is that some of you will be hearing this for the first time and some of you will be hearing it for the 15th, and either of those is okay. Here it is. Matt Groening hid his initials in Homer's face. If you look at Homer in profile, the curl of his ear forms the letter G. The squiggles of his hair across the back of his head form an M and G Matt Groening. It's been there since the very first proper drawing of the character, sitting on every Homer model sheet ever drawn. The show even acknowledged it on screen in a season 16 episode, where the gag is briefly pulled apart for comic effect. Once you know it's there, it's actually quite hard to look at Homer and not see his creator's signature on the side of his head. The ear is more obvious than the hair, by the way. Most of the other characters share the same ear shape, so it's a slightly less private signature than people sometimes claim, but the M of the hair is genuinely unique to Homer. The four-finger thing is a detail I always thought was kind of beautiful in a quiet way. The Simpsons characters all have 4 fingers per hand, which is a long-standing animation shortcut going back to the early days of cartoons. Fewer fingers means fewer lines, means faster, cheaper animation. Most cartoon characters have 4 fingers for this reason. Mickey Mouse has 4 fingers. Bugs Bunny has 4 fingers. It's the convention. But the show takes the convention and turns it into a small piece of theology. The Simpsons universe has rules about who gets to have 5 fingers. Pretty much only God and Jesus in any of their on-screen appearances are shown with 5-fingered hands. Everyone else, even the most powerful figures in the show, even the President of the United States when he shows up, even the alien overlords, 4 fingers. 5 fingers is reserved for the divine. It's a little detail that I find genuinely lovely because it's the kind of choice nobody had to make. Nobody at Fox was demanding that God get 5 fingers. The animators just decided. Let me talk briefly about how long it takes to make an episode, because this is one of those numbers that always seems impossible to me. Each episode of The Simpsons takes roughly 6 months to produce, from the first outline through to the finished broadcast. 6 months. That's why the show is always a few seasons ahead of itself in terms of production, and why current events in episodes are sometimes referencing things that happened half a year before the broadcast. The pipeline goes roughly like this. There's an outline, then there's a script draft, then there's a writer's room rewrite, which can be brutal because the show has always had a high gag density target, and the rewrites are where most of the funny material comes in. Then there's a table read with the cast, then there's an animatic, which is basically a rough storyboard played at speed with placeholder voices, so the writers can see how the timing works. Then there's layout, which is the step where the animators design every shot and every camera angle. Layout is reportedly the most time-consuming part of the whole process. Then the actual animation, then the color, then the final composite, then sound and music and final mix. 6 months. for 22 minutes of television, times 20-odd episodes a season, times the show's full run so far. There are people who have been working on this show for longer than some of you have been alive, and they're still grinding out new frames every week. The animation studios have changed over the years. The Tracy Ullman shorts and the first 3 seasons were done by Klasky Supo, the Studio Supo, and Klasky Ran. The look back then was rougher, more fluid, a bit chaotic. If you go back and watch season 1, the characters move differently. They're less locked in. Bart's design wobbles around a bit. Homer's body proportions shift between scenes. There's a kind of organic looseness to the early animation that the show eventually traded away for consistency. From season 4 onward, the animation was handled by Film Roman, which is where the show got the polished, slightly more conventional look that most people associate with it. The characters became more locked in, the model sheets got stricter. The animation, while still expressive, started behaving the way you'd expect a network show to behave. Film Roman ran the show from season 4 through to about season 27, which is the bulk of the run. Since then, the show has been animated in-house at Fox Television Animation, now called 20th Television Animation, mostly out of their Burbank facilities. Now, here's a fun production fact I think is genuinely cool. The Treehouse of Horror 6 episode in 1995 contains a segment called Homer 3, where Homer accidentally falls into a third dimension and finds himself rendered in full 3D CGI animation. He walks around a wireframe landscape and eventually emerges into live-action Los Angeles. That segment was animated by Pacific Data Images, who at the time were one of the leading CGI studios in the world. Pacific Data Images would later go on to make Ants and then Shrek, and then become essentially the foundation of DreamWorks animation. So the very first time millions of Americans saw a broadcast television character rendered in 3D CGI, it was Homer Simpson walking through a wireframe void, animated by the people who'd later define a whole era of computer-animated film. That's a kind of accidental history. The show's animation technology has continued to update under the surface. From season 14, with an episode called The Great Louse Detective, the production fully switched from cell animation, which is the traditional hand-drawn on paper then painted on cells approach, over to digital ink and paint. The visual difference is subtle, but it's there. Lines become cleaner, colors become flatter. The slight grain of physical cells disappears. Some fans miss it, some don't. Then in season 20, the show jumped to high-definition widescreen, the 16:9 format that's now standard. They redesigned the opening sequence for HD, gave the chalkboard gag a fresh setup, and from that point on, the show looked, technically speaking, like a modern series. If you watch season 19 and then watch season 20 back-to-back, the leap is quite striking. The actual artwork is the same artwork, but it's just rendered with more pixels and a wider frame. Same Springfield, slightly cleaner glass. One last small thing for this section, because I think it's worth mentioning. The Simpsons is technically classified as a single-camera production, which sounds odd because obviously there are no cameras involved in an animated show. The term is a holdover from live-action television, where single camera refers to a show that's shot with one camera at a time, scene by scene, like a film, rather than multi-camera, which is the sitcom on a stage setup with 3 or 4 cameras shooting a live audience simultaneously. The Simpsons gets the single camera label because it's storyboarded and animated shot by shot, with each scene composed individually, like a film. There's no live audience, there's no canned laughter. The show has never used a laugh track in its entire run, which is, when you stop to think about it, one of the reasons it ages so well. Most sitcoms from 1989 sound dated now because the laughter feels stuck in the era. The Simpsons sounds the same in 1989 as it does in 2026. The jokes either land or they don't, and you decide for yourself, right? Now let's wander over to the actual hidden details inside the frames. The Easter eggs and the small visual jokes that the writers and animators have been quietly slipping past us across the entire run of the show. There's a particular kind of detail in this show that I find more satisfying than any of the others, and that's the kind you can only really see on a freeze frame. A still moment in the background of a scene that contains a joke nobody's going to catch in real time. The Simpsons has more of these than any other show I can think of. And it has them because the writers and animators have always assumed that some percentage of the audience is going to pause and look, so they reward you for looking. Let me start with one of the most famous ones, which is the letters A113. A113 has appeared in dozens of Simpsons episodes over the years, on doors and license plates and address numbers and police reports. It is not, as some people assume, a reference to a real address or a Bible passage or anything like that. A113 is the room number of a specific classroom at the California Institute of the Arts, which is the school where most of the major American animators of the past 40 years went to study. Brad Bird, who directed The Incredibles and Ratatouille, went there. So did John Lasseter, the founder of Pixar. So did Tim Burton. So did the writer and director of dozens of other animated films you've seen. A113 was specifically the classroom where the graphic design and character animation classes were taught. The tradition started, as far as anyone can tell, with Brad Bird, who began slipping A113 into his projects as a private joke. Other CalArts graduates picked it up. Now it's a kind of secret handshake in the animation industry. If you see A113 on screen in a piece of animation, you're being silently saluted by a CalArts grad. Brad Bird directed a couple of early Simpsons episodes, including the absolutely classic Krusty Gets Busted, and from there the writers and animators kept the tradition going. The number has appeared so many times in the show by now that it's basically part of the furniture of Springfield. The Pixar films are absolutely covered in it too. Toy Story has one, Finding Nemo has one, Wall-E has one. It's everywhere. You just have to know to look. Now here's one I think is genuinely delightful. In the opening sequence of the show, the bit where the family races home and Marge has Maggie at the grocery store, the cash register rings up an amount when Maggie gets accidentally scanned. The number is $847.63. That's not a random figure. According to interviews with the writers, $847.63 was the average monthly cost of raising a baby in the United States in 1989, the year the show launched. Which means, in passing, in a 1-second visual gag in the opening credits, the show is making a sociological joke about the cost of children in America. The number has been updated subtly over the years in various recuts of the opening to keep pace with inflation, which is the kind of detail that nobody had to put in there, and that genuinely nobody outside of the writer's room would have ever noticed if it hadn't been mentioned in commentary tracks. Speaking of the opening, the chalkboard gag is a whole world in itself. Every episode opens with Bart writing some line of punishment on the chalkboard, and the line changes essentially every time. In the Season 2 episode called Bart Gets an F, the chalkboard line is, "I am not a 32-year-old woman." This is a wink to the audience because Bart is famously voiced by Nancy Cartwright, who was 32 at the time. The joke is that Bart is breaking the fourth wall to acknowledge his own voice actor. The writers have been doing this kind of self-referential thing in the chalkboard for the entire run of the show, and there are full archives online where people have cataloged every single chalkboard line, episode by episode. Some of them are jokes about current events, some are jokes about the show itself, some are jokes about the audience, some are jokes about the network. It's its own little category of comedy hiding in plain sight at the very start of every episode. Right? Let me tell you about the Where's Waldo gag because this one always makes me laugh. There's a running joke in The Simpsons, going back to the early seasons, where Homer's shown reading a Where's Waldo book and being unable to find Waldo. He gets visibly comically frustrated. He throws the book, he gives up, he'll come back to it 10 minutes later and still fail. The joke is that Homer, being Homer, is not capable of solving even a children's puzzle. But here's the bit that's a properly hidden gag. If you look at certain background shots of Springfield across multiple episodes, particularly in establishing shots and crowd scenes, Waldo is actually there. He's hiding in the town, he's walking down the street, he's at the carnival, he's in the audience of a Krusty taping. The animators have been slipping him into the background of Springfield for years, completely unprompted, as a private joke about Homer's inability to find him. So while Homer's in his armchair giving up on the book, the actual Waldo is in fact just outside his living room window getting on with his day. Homer never knows. Homer never looks. The joke only works if you're paying attention to the corners of the frame. Here's a small detail about the music, which I'll come back to properly later in the script, but is worth dropping in here. Danny Elfman, who composed the main theme, has his name hidden on a storefront in the original opening sequence. Right at the moment the theme music begins, the camera pans past a shop that has his name on the awning. It's a quiet signature, like a painter putting his name in a corner of the canvas. Elfman wrote the theme in about 2 days by his own account, and it has never been replaced. The same theme song all the way through. Same brass arrangement, same melody, same final flourish. They've remixed it slightly over the years for various openings, but the bones are identical. It's one of the most recognized pieces of television music ever written, and the composer's signature is tucked into the credits where almost nobody notices. Now the Futurama connections. Futurama, which is the other Matt Groening animated show, was always intended as a separate universe, but the two shows wink at each other constantly. There are Easter eggs in The Simpsons that reference Futurama and vice versa. The season 15 episode where the family goes to a video rental store has a Futurama poster visible in the background, with Fry and Bender on it. The season 10 episode where Lisa is walking past a crowd of children has Uter, the German exchange student, wearing a Futurama t-shirt. There's a much more involved crossover episode in season 26 called Simpsorama, where the Planet Express crew from Futurama time travels back to present-day Springfield, but the smaller Easter eggs are scattered all the way through both shows. The two universes are technically separate, but they keep waving at each other across the divide. Groening loves this kind of thing. He's the kind of creator who sees his shows as part of a single, larger body of work. There's a fun one about Springfield itself. A lot of the named streets and characters in The Simpsons come directly from Portland, Oregon, which is Groening's hometown. Lovejoy Street is a real street in Portland, so is Flanders Street, so is Quimby Street, so is Terwilliger Boulevard, which is where Sideshow Bob's full name, Robert Underdunk Terwilliger, comes from. Kearney Street, Burnside Street. These are all real places in Portland that Groening drove past as a kid. Now they're characters in the most watched cartoon in television history. There's something genuinely touching about that to me, the idea that an entire fictional town was secretly built out of the street signs of one specific real city. Groening basically just took his neighborhood and converted the geography into a cast list. While we're in this corner, let me mention the address number patterns, because Reddit has been tracking these for years, and some of them are real and some of them are stretches. The Simpson family lives at 742 Evergreen Terrace. That number recurs throughout the show in different contexts, although less obsessively than the 103 thing in Dexter that some people compare it to. There are also recurring uses of apartment 305, room 5, and the number 47, which writer Brad Bird and others have admitted to slipping in deliberately. The number 47 in particular shows up in the show in part because of Joe Menosky, a Star Trek writer who pushed the same number through Star Trek, The Next Generation, Voyager, and various other shows during the same period. It's not a Simpsons-specific thing, it's a broader television writer joke that the Simpsons writers picked up and ran with. You'll spot 47 in police reports, on jerseys, in addresses, on prison uniforms. It just keeps showing up. Here's a name detail that I think is properly evil, and I mean that in an admiring way. Milhouse Van Houten, Bart's best friend, has a full name. His middle name is Mussolini. Milhouse Mussolini Van Houten. It's been canonical since the early seasons. The middle name is a deliberate dark joke from the writers, possibly intended to make an already awkward name even more unfortunate, possibly meant to suggest something about Milhouse's parents and their politics, possibly just because the writers found it funny. The show has never really explained it, it's just there in the record. Milhouse, the most blameless boy in Springfield, the most relentlessly bullied kid in the school, has the middle name of an Italian fascist dictator. That joke has been sitting in the canon for decades. Let me give you one more from this category because I think it's a lovely little piece of writing. In the season 5 episode where Principal Skinner is shown to have served as a prisoner of war in Vietnam, his POW number is revealed in passing to be 24601. That number is the prisoner number of Jean Valjean, the protagonist of Les Miserables, both the Victor Hugo novel and the musical adaptation. At the time it aired, it was just a literary joke for the audience members who happened to know their classic French novels. 4 seasons later, in the season 9 episode The Principal and the Pauper, the show pulled the gag inside out by revealing that Skinner was a former criminal who had stolen another man's identity and become a respectable member of society, which is of course exactly the plot of Les Miserables. Jean Valjean stole bread, served time as prisoner 24601, then escaped his identity and built a new respectable life under a different name. So the show planted a literary Easter egg as a 1-second background gag in season 5. Then 4 years later turned the entire Easter egg into a full plot. That's the kind of thing that makes me feel quite fond of these writers, honestly. Most television shows don't even remember what they did last season. The Simpsons hides a clue in a single shot and then 4 years later builds an episode around the same reference. You could not script that kind of long-form storytelling on purpose. Or rather you could, but almost nobody actually does. The Principal and the Pauper, by the way, ended up being one of the most controversial episodes in the show's history. Harry Shearer, who voices Skinner, hated it. Matt Groening reportedly hated it. The writer's room has effectively pretended for years that it didn't happen. I'll come back to that one properly in a later section. For now, just know that the buried Les Miserables reference is, I think, the cleverest single Easter egg the show has ever planted. Now, I want to tell you about one more buried thing in this section because it's the kind of Easter egg that operates on a scale I find genuinely impressive. The McBain hidden movie. McBain is a fictional action star in the Simpsons universe, voiced by Harry Shearer, who appears as a kind of running parody of Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone. He's the in-show movie star whose films Bart and Homer watch, the way you'd watch a Stallone film. Throughout the run of the show, there have been short clips of McBain films inserted into various episodes as throwaway gags. Most viewers register them as one-off jokes. You see a 30-second snippet of McBain in a car chase, or a McBain shootout, or a McBain in a confrontation with his boss, and you move on. Nothing seems unusual. Then, somewhere around the late 90s, fans started noticing that the McBain clips, when watched in order across multiple episodes, actually form a complete short film, roughly 4 minutes long, with a coherent narrative. I'm not making this up. If you watch the McBain clip from The Way We Was in Season 2, it shows McBain in a confrontation with his boss after learning about a drug cartel run by Senator Mendoza. Then, in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, also Season 2, McBain's friend and partner Scoey gets killed, and McBain swears revenge on Mendoza. Then, in The War of the Simpsons, McBain obtains a gun as part of his revenge plan. The clips, scattered across different episodes that aired weeks or months apart, fit together. The whole thing reads like a typical loose cannon cop action movie before settling into something closer to a James Bond parody by the end. What I find most extraordinary about this is the implication. The writers, when they were writing the original episodes, were either deliberately constructing a hidden long-form joke across multiple weeks, or one of the early writers wrote a complete fake action movie as a bit, and then chopped it up and seeded the pieces into different episodes as filler. Either way, somebody on the show put real effort into a joke that nobody was going to notice for years. The discovery of the hidden movie was, when it spread online, one of the great Easter egg revelations in television fandom. People genuinely lost their minds over it. A few other buried shape Easter eggs are worth mentioning briefly before we move on. There's a sequence on the show where Bart destroys a stack of George H.W. Bush's memoirs, and for a single frame, a shred of paper drifts across the screen with the words VP Quayle and embarrassment legibly printed on it. That's a one-frame gag. A reference to Bush's Vice President Dan Quayle, planted in a way that only viewers who paused the episode could spot. There's an even subtler one in the Treehouse of Horror 9, in the segment called The Terror of Tiny Toon, where Bart and Lisa get sucked into an itchy and scratchy cartoon. If you look very carefully at the credits at the start of the cartoon within a cartoon, the credits include real names of Simpsons animators woven into the fake credits as an in-joke. The animators were, in effect, signing their own work twice. Once in the real Simpsons credits at the end of the episode, once inside the fake cartoon they'd animated for the segment. The level of effort that goes into a one-frame gag on this show is, I think, the thing that genuinely separates The Simpsons from most of its imitators. The writers and animators trust the audience to find these things eventually, even if it takes years. Some of these jokes weren't broadly known until DVD commentaries started releasing in the early 2000s and writers began explaining what they'd buried. Others were spotted by attentive fans on Reddit decades later. The show is, in this sense, still being discovered. There are details from Season 4 episodes that didn't get widely noticed until 2020. There are background gags and Treehouse of Horror specials that are still being cataloged. The show has been running for an enormous stretch of time, and we're still finding things in it. Right, let's move on. We've spent enough time on the things hiding inside the frames. Let's go and meet the people doing the voices, because their stories are honestly half the reason this show works. Nancy Cartwright walked into the Simpsons audition room in 1987 to read for the part of Lisa. That's the audition she'd been called in for. She was the right age for it, the right type, the right kind of voice. She read for Lisa, and from what I can tell, she did fine, but somewhere in the room while she was waiting around, she heard about the Bart role, the older brother, the troublemaker. And she just looked at the description and thought, that one, that's the one I want. So she asked, on the spot, if she could read for Bart instead. That's not a thing you're supposed to do at an audition. You read what you're called in for. You don't pitch yourself for a different part. But she did it anyway, and Matt Groening said yes, and she read, and she walked out of that room with the part of Bart Simpson. She has been Bart for nearly 40 years. There is a generation of people, multiple generations actually, who have never heard another voice come out of that character's mouth. And the only reason that voice exists is because Nancy Cartwright, at the actual audition for a different role, decided to ask the question. She's voiced essentially every important boy in Springfield, by the way. Bart, obviously, but also Nelson Muntz, Ralph Wiggum, Todd Flanders, Kearney, Database. The list goes on. The reason her credits are so heavy is that her voice has incredible range in that specific register, the early pubescent boy register, and the show used her for nearly every character that needed to land there. It's the kind of thing that becomes invisible once you know the show. Of course, Ralph Wiggum and Nelson Muntz sound completely different. They have to. They're different people. The fact that they're the same actor is one of those facts that, once it lands, is hard to unhear. But Dan Castellaneta is the absolute monster of the voice cast in terms of range. Castellaneta voices Homer. He also voices Grandpa, Krusty the Clown, Barney Gumble, Mayor Quimby, Groundskeeper Willie, Hans Moleman, Sideshow Mel, Gil Gunderson, the squeaky-voiced teen, Itchy from Itchy and Scratchy, Kodos from the Aliens, and Santa's Little Helper, who admittedly mostly barks. He holds the in-show record for most characters voiced by a single actor, well over 30. If you watch any given Simpsons episode, there's a decent chance that at least half of the male characters speaking are all coming out of the same man's mouth. Castellaneta has also voiced characters outside the show. He's the robot devil in Futurama. He's the genie in the Aladdin direct-to-video sequels after Robin Williams left the role. The man is, without exaggeration, one of the most prolific voice actors working in animation. And his approach to the work, by various accounts, is very technical and very precise. He treats each character as a separate physical performance. He moves differently, he stands differently, he breathes differently for Homer versus Krusty, right? The dough story, this is one I love. Homer's dough, the exclamation that he uses about 1,000 times across the series, was added to the Oxford English Dictionary in 2001. That's a real thing. It's in the actual dictionary, with The Simpsons cited as the source. But the interesting bit is what the word actually is in the scripts. In every Simpsons script, going back to the first episode, the line is not written as dough. It's written as annoyed grunt. That's it. That's the stage direction. The writers know that Castellaneta will produce a specific sound when he sees annoyed grunt on the page, and they trust him to do it, and they don't write out the actual onomatopoeia. So if you go and look at an actual Simpsons script, you won't find a single instance of the word dough anywhere in the dialogue. Just Homer, annoyed grunt. The most famous catchphrase in animated television history doesn't technically exist in the written record of the show. The origin of the sound itself is even better. Castellaneta has said in interviews that he based dough on Jimmy Finlayson's Dough from the Laurel and Hardy films of the 1930s. Finlayson was a Scottish actor who'd play these slightly pompous, easily flustered characters who would let out a long, frustrated "do" when things went wrong. Castellaneta shortened it from a long, drawn-out wail to a sharp, clipped, one-syllable grunt. The longer version didn't fit the pacing of an animated sitcom. The shorter version became iconic. So Homer's catchphrase, technically, is an Americanized remix of a Scottish vaudeville actor's noise from the silent and early sound era of film. Comedy, like everything else, is just people borrowing from people all the way back. Yeardley Smith, who voices Lisa, is the only main cast member who really voices only one character. Everyone else doubles up on parts. Castellaneta has his 30, Cartwright has her dozen, Julie Kavner has her 4. Hank Azaria has more than I can comfortably list. Harry Shearer has a similar range. Yeardley Smith has Lisa. She occasionally voices Grandma Flanders or a small recurring character. But for all practical purposes, she is Lisa, and that's her job. Her contract is reportedly different from the rest of the cast as a result. The amount she gets paid per episode reflects the fact that she's not pulling triple duty across the script. Just the one part, one of the great single-character performances in the history of television. Julie Kavner, who voices Marge, has a contract clause I find genuinely interesting. She doesn't have to do Marge's voice on camera. Apparently, the contract specifies that she's not required to perform the voice in any public appearance, interview, or recorded promotional setting, only in the actual studio recording sessions for the show. The reason, by various accounts, is partly that Marge's voice is physically demanding, the gravelly low register requires real work to produce, and partly that Kavner is just an intensely private person. She does very few interviews. She rarely appears in public for the show. She does her work, she goes home, and Marge stays in the booth. She also voices Marge's sisters, Patty and Selma, and their mother, Jacqueline, so all the Bouvier women are her. The family resemblance vocally is partly an accident of the casting decision and partly something Kavner has built deliberately over the years. The three older women all sound related because they're all coming from the same person. Hank Azaria joined the show in season 2. He wasn't in the first season at all. He was cast initially to do an impression of Al Pacino for the character of Moe Sislak, the bartender. That impression has drifted somewhat over the years, by the way. If you go back to the very first Moe appearances, the Pacino is much more pronounced. By the modern era of the show, Moe has his own distinct voice that's recognizably Moe rather than recognizably Pacino. But the foundation is there. Once Azaria was in, the producers realized they had someone with extraordinary range, and they started piling characters on him. He's Moe, he's Chief Wiggum, he's Comic Book Guy, he's Professor Frink, he's Dr. Nick Riviera, he's Snake Jailbird, he's the Sea Captain, he's Superintendent Chalmers, he's Bumblebee Man, he was Apu Nahasapima Petalon from the first appearance until he stepped back from the role in 2020 after the conversation sparked by Hari Kondabolu's documentary The Problem with Apu. He was Carl Carlson and Lou the Cop in the early seasons before stepping back from those roles too. The man has voiced more major Simpsons characters than most actors have voiced in their entire careers. Harry Shearer might be the most quietly important member of the cast. He voices Mr. Burns, Smithers, Ned Flanders, Principal Skinner, Kent Brockman, Reverend Lovejoy, Lenny Leonard, Otto Mann, Rainier Wolfcastle, Kang the Alien, and many more. Burns is one of the great vocal performances in animation history, that wheezing, decrepit, predatory rasp that defines the character. Flanders is Shearer too, which always blows my mind a little when I stop to think about it. Burns and Flanders are voiced by the same person. That's the same throat producing those two completely different worldviews. Remarkable. Shearer briefly left the show in May 2015 over a contract dispute. There was a real moment of uncertainty where it looked like the show would have to recast roughly a quarter of its principal cast simultaneously. He returned in July of the same year after the deal was renegotiated. There was apparently never a serious plan to replace him because the show without his characters would have been unrecognizable. But the dispute was real, and for 2 months in 2015 it was a genuine possibility that Mr. Burns and Ned Flanders were both about to get new voices. Shearer was also at the center of one of the show's quieter losses. He stopped voicing Dr. Hibbert in 2021 as part of the broader move announced in 2020 that white actors would no longer be voicing non-white characters on the show. Dr. Hibbert is now voiced by Kevin Michael Richardson. Carl Carlson is now voiced by Alex Dezer. The transitions have been handled relatively gracefully, but the changes are real and audible if you watch back-to-back episodes from before and after the recasting. Now here's a small detail I always find slightly magical. Maggie Simpson, the baby, doesn't really speak. She sucks on a pacifier and makes occasional noises. Most of those pacifier sucking sounds and small baby murmurs are recorded by Matt Groening himself. The creator of the show is, in a very technical sense, in the cast as Maggie. He's not credited for it because it's such a small thing, but the noise the pacifier makes when she sucks on it, that's him. The one time Maggie has actually said a word in the canonical run of the show was in the season 4 episode Lisa's First Word, which aired in 1992. She says "Daddy," and the line is voiced by Elizabeth Taylor. they flew Elizabeth Taylor in to record a single word for a Simpsons episode. By various accounts, she had to do it more than once because the producers wanted a particular emotional quality, and her first take wasn't quite right. The story goes that she got a bit irritated being asked to redo a one-word part, but she did it, and the take they used is incredibly moving. A baby's first word voiced by one of the greatest film stars of the 20th century for a single second of an animated sitcom. The show has had hundreds of guest stars, and this might still be the one I find most charming. A small thing about the salaries because I think it's worth saying. The original cast members were paid relatively modestly for the first decade of the show, around $30,000 per episode. In 1998, they threatened a strike, and the salaries rose to roughly $125,000 per episode. By the late 2000s, the figures had climbed considerably higher, and the cast has remained one of the highest paid voice ensembles in television. The whole thing is, when you think about it, slightly extraordinary. These are people who never appear on camera, whose faces most viewers couldn't pick out of a lineup, who do their work in a booth a few hours a week, and who collectively built a piece of cultural infrastructure that's still running. They deserve every penny. One last detail. The original cast all started doing their recordings together in the same room around one microphone like a radio play. The dynamic of the early seasons, the sense that all these characters are in conversation with each other, comes partly from that fact. They could actually react to each other in real time. Over the years, as schedules got more complicated and remote recording became more common, the cast started recording separately. The 2020 pandemic accelerated that completely. They now record from home studios most of the time. The performances are still excellent, but there's something gone from the work that you can hear if you listen back to a season 4 episode and then a season 34 episode. The early ones have a slight sense of room, of bodies in space together. The later ones don't. It's the kind of thing only the cast themselves probably really feel. But it's there, right? Let's go look at the opening credits and the couch gags, because they're worth a section on their own. I'll admit, I've got a slight obsession with the opening sequence of The Simpsons. I think it's one of the best designed pieces of television introduction ever made. And I mean that as a piece of craft, not just as a piece of nostalgia. The actual structure of the thing was built to do something very specific, and once you understand what it was built to do, it becomes a lot more interesting. Most television openings serve one job, which is to play the theme song over a static or semi-static title card and let you know what show you're watching. The Simpsons opening does something different. It uses the same theme music every time, but the visual content inside the opening varies, sometimes a little, sometimes a lot. The chalkboard message at the start is different almost every episode. The saxophone solo Lisa plays at the end of her school day is different. The couch gag at the end can be anywhere from 2 seconds to a minute long. The whole thing was designed from the very beginning to be a flexible container that the producers could pad or trim depending on how long the actual episode ran. That's a small piece of TV production magic. If the episode came in 2 minutes over its target runtime, the opening could be shortened. If the episode came in 2 minutes short, the opening could be stretched, mostly by extending the couch gag. The opening sequence is essentially a buffer. It absorbs the timing variation of the rest of the show. The audience never notices because the broad shape of the opening, the family doing their morning routine and racing home, stays exactly the same. But within that shape, there's room to play. The structure goes roughly like this. We start with a swooping shot through clouds onto Springfield. Bart writing on the chalkboard, Bart skateboarding past various Springfielders, Homer leaving work at the nuclear plant, dropping the radioactive rod down the back of his shirt, Marge at the grocery store with Maggie, Lisa getting kicked out of band practice for playing too soulfully, the family racing home in their respective vehicles, and then the couch gag where they all converge on the living room couch and something usually unexpected happens. Each of those beats has buried details. Marge is shopping with Maggie in the cart, and Maggie gets scanned in by the cashier. The cash register, as we mentioned earlier, rings up a number that's based on the actual cost of raising a baby in 1989. Quick callback there, won't dwell on it. Lisa's saxophone solo is, by various accounts, written by a different musician on a fairly regular basis. Sometimes the solo is a few seconds, sometimes it goes on for ages. The piece changes more often than most people realize. Right. Now let's talk about the couch gag, because the couch gag is one of the great inventions in television comedy. The couch gag started in season 1 as a simple thing. The The family runs in, sits on the couch, and something tiny happens. They land in a pile. The couch is too small, the cat is already there. Early couch gags lasted maybe 2 seconds and existed almost entirely as a small payoff before the episode proper started. Over the years, they evolved into their own art form. By the time the show was in its later seasons, the producers were commissioning entire 1-minute short films from outside animators just to use as a couch gag in a single episode. The most famous external animator couch gag is probably the one done by the British street artist Banksy in 2010. Banksy, who is, to be clear, a graffiti artist who'd never made a piece of broadcast television in his life, was given full creative control over the opening of a season 22 episode. He used it to make a guerrilla protest about overseas animation labor. The couch gag depicted a sprawling sweatshop full of malnourished workers and abused animals making Simpsons merchandise in horrifying conditions. It is, I should say, properly disturbing. It does not look like a Simpsons couch gag. It looks like a piece of political art that someone has accidentally aired in the wrong slot. The genuinely remarkable thing about it is that Fox aired it, almost entirely intact. The producers and the network looked at this protest about their own production practices and they put it on television. There were apparently some internal arguments about whether to broadcast it, and some shots were trimmed slightly, but the substance of the piece made it to air. It is, by some distance, the most subversive opening sequence the show has ever produced, and it was done by a person who isn't formally part of the show. The fact that it exists at all is a small miracle. The Sylvain Chomet couch gag is another favorite of mine. Chomet is the French animator who made the films The Triplets of Belleville and The Illusionist. He was given a couch gag and produced this beautifully strange, slightly melancholy little vignette that turns the Simpson family into Chomet-style characters wandering through a Paris-flavored Springfield. The animation looks nothing like the show. The colors are different. The drawing is different, and yet it absolutely works. Don Hertzfeldt did a couch gag in 2014 that's properly bizarre. Hertzfeldt is the American stick figure animator who made the film It's Such a Beautiful Day. His couch gag imagines a far future Simpsons in which the show has been broadcasting for millennia and the characters have mutated into incomprehensible alien blobs. Homer just keeps grunting his catchphrase, distorted into oblivion. It's 2 minutes of genuinely disturbing comedy, and it's still officially canon as a Simpsons opening. Bill Plimpton has done a few of these as well. The American stop-motion duo Pess has done one. Guillermo del Toro did a Halloween-themed opening for one of the Tree House of Horror episodes. The couch gag has become, in its later evolution, a kind of guest artist slot where the show invites animation legends to come in and play with the property for a minute. The HD redesign in Season 20 is worth talking about for a moment. When the show switched to widescreen high-definition broadcast, the opening was reworked from the ground up. They reanimated all the elements. They redrew the establishing shots of Springfield. They added several new characters to the running gag, because by Season 20 there were a lot more recurring townspeople than there had been in Season 1, and the opening had never been updated to reflect that. The new version even has a meta-joke built into it, where one of the chalkboard messages reads, "We hope you enjoy this reimagined opening," acknowledging the change directly. There's a piece of design philosophy underneath the redesign that I think is quite lovely. They didn't replace the original opening, they added a second version that lives alongside it. Reruns of the early seasons still use the original opening. The newer episodes use the HD one. Both are canonical. The show has, in effect, 2 title sequences running in parallel across its broadcast life. Right, let's talk about the chalkboard gag because it deserves its own moment. Bart writing lines on the chalkboard at the start of each episode is the show's longest-running visual joke. Hundreds and hundreds of chalkboard messages have aired across the run of the series. Some are pure nonsense. I will not waste chalk. Some are jokes about current events. Spring break does not need to be all year long. Some are jokes about the show itself, the wink at Nancy Cartwright's age being one of them, which we touched on earlier. Some are jokes about the network. The Fox network does not make a habit of canceling shows 3 episodes in. And some are quietly poignant, particularly the ones used to mark the deaths of cast and crew members, where the chalkboard would read something like, "We'll miss you, Marcia," referring to Marcia Wallace, who voiced Edna Krabappel. There's a whole archive online of every single chalkboard line, episode by episode, season by season. People have been cataloging this for nearly the entire run of the show. Some episodes don't have a chalkboard gag at all. Treehouse of Horror episodes almost never do, because the opening sequence for those is replaced with a Halloween theme version. Special format episodes sometimes skip it, but the vast majority of the show's 700-odd episodes start with Bart writing some line on the board, which is in itself an extraordinary thing to maintain across 3.5 decades of television. The Treehouse of Horror openings are their own category, and I want to spend a minute on them because they're properly inventive. The annual Halloween anthology episodes started in 1990 with Treehouse of Horror I, and they've aired pretty much every year since. As of recent seasons, we're up to somewhere around Treehouse of Horror XXXXX. Each one has its own custom opening sequence. The chalkboard becomes something horror-themed. The couch gag becomes a death scene, often genuinely macabre. The titles themselves are reworked to be drippy or bloody or otherwise Halloween-coded. The first Treehouse of Horror in 1990 had a much more cautious opening, mostly because the producers weren't sure if Fox would allow them to push as far as they wanted to. By the time you get into the late 90s Treehouses, the openings are absolutely bonkers. Family members get murdered, the credits scroll past in graveyard-shaped fonts. The show is, for one episode a year, allowed to be properly weird. The opening sequences for those episodes are kind of greatest hits reel of what the animation team can do when they're given permission to ignore the normal style guide. A little point on the theme song that I want to expand here since we mentioned it briefly earlier. Danny Elfman wrote it in 2 days, but the version that aired on the first episode of the show in December 1989 is structurally almost identical to the version that airs on Disney Plus today. Same melody, same brass arrangement, same drum fill, same final cadence. There have been small remixes for the HD redesign and for various Treehouse episodes, but the bones of the piece have never been replaced. The same fanfare the whole way through. That's almost unheard of for a network show that's run this long. Most long-running series have refreshed their theme music at least once. The Simpsons has just decided that what works, works. Elfman won an Emmy for it eventually, alongside a separate Emmy for the show's main title design as a whole. The opening sequence as a complete piece with the music and the visuals together was recognized in 1997 with the award for Outstanding Main Title Design. It's a fairly geeky award, not one most casual viewers would have heard of, but it's the kind of recognition that matters within the industry. The Simpsons opening is, in a craft sense, considered one of the best designed openings in the history of American television. People in the field study it. One thing I find quite touching, by the way, is that the opening has been parodied and homaged so many times across other shows that the structure itself is now a kind of public domain artistic shape. Family Guy did a parody of it in their crossover episode. South Park has done it, Futurama did it, Rick and Morty has done it. Dozens of late-night sketches have copied the chalkboard and couch shape. The opening sequence of The Simpsons has become, in a small way, one of those cultural reference points that doesn't even need explaining. Everyone knows what you mean when you say Simpsons-style opening. You don't have to define it. The form is just out there now. Let me mention a few specific famous chalkboard messages because some of them have lives of their own at this point. The line, "I will not waste chalk," is widely considered the first one, or rather the first one that became a running gag because Bart writing lines is the very first visual we get of him in Season 1. Other ones that have stuck in fans' heads include, "I will not show off," "I will not call my teacher hot cakes," "Funny noises are not funny," and "Garlic gum is not funny," which is, to be fair, an opinion the show itself doesn't really hold. There are also several that have become part of the show's self-referential humor, like "I will not Xerox my butt," "Underwear should be worn on the inside," and the much-loved "I cannot absolve sins." Some of the most quoted chalkboard messages are the topical ones. Around the time of major events, the show has used the chalkboard to make small jokes about the news. After the death of beloved staff members, the board has been used to send a quiet farewell, as with Marcia Wallace, who voiced Edna Krabappel. After certain election cycles, the chalkboard has carried small political winks. The chalkboard is, in this way, one of the only parts of the show that can react to current events with relative immediacy. The rest of the production pipeline takes months. The chalkboard can be re-recorded and reanimated in a single afternoon if needed. The famous couch gags also deserve a small dedicated mention. The Family in the Maze couch gag, where they have to navigate a hedge maze to reach the couch. the crowded couch gag, where dozens of past Simpsons characters cram onto the couch alongside the family, the burned-out couch gag, where they arrive to find only smoke and ashes, the couch in the sky gag, where the family flies up into the clouds while sitting on the couch. These have become small canonical moments in their own right, with fans able to identify specific couch gags from a single frame, the same way music fans identify songs from a single chord. Some episodes are remembered as much for their couch gag as for their actual plot. And while we're talking about design choices, let me bring up one of the most interesting what-if moments in the show's history. It's the kind of detail that, once you know it, slightly changes how you look at certain characters. Specifically, the relationship between Homer and one other very famous figure in Springfield, which we'll get into in the next section. Have you ever noticed that Krusty the Clown looks exactly like Homer with hair and clown makeup? It's one of those things that, once it lands, you can't really unsee. The head is the same shape, the body is the same proportions, the nose is the same, the pot belly is the same, the voice is even the same actor, Dan Castellaneta, doing two different vocal performances. Strip Krusty's green hair and his white makeup and his bow tie, and what you've got is Homer Simpson with a slightly more gravelly voice. The resemblance is not accidental. Matt Groening has talked about this in various interviews over the years. The original plan for the show, in the very earliest pitches, was that Krusty the Clown would secretly be Homer. The reveal would come eventually in some big climactic episode. The satirical idea Groening was going for, and I'm quoting his own framing here, was that Bart was a kid who had no respect for his father but absolutely worshipped a clown who looked exactly like his father. The whole point of Krusty as a character was that he was supposed to be the version of Homer that Bart had decided to love, the father he wanted, dressed up. The twist got scrapped. Or, more accurately, it got deferred and then quietly buried. The writers reportedly looked at the logistics of pulling off that kind of reveal in a half-hour animated comedy and decided it was too complicated to set up properly without sacrificing too much of the regular character dynamics. The Krusty equals Homer plot would have meant rewriting the entire foundation of Bart's relationship with both characters, and it would have required a level of mythology building that the show at the time wasn't quite committed to. So they kept the visual joke, kept the resemblance, and let the audience notice or not notice as they pleased. There's one episode in the original run where Homer is able to convincingly pretend to be Krusty, putting on the wig and the makeup and the costume and fooling people. The episode never explicitly references the original plan, but it's there in the bones of the show, as a kind of fossilized remnant of the twist that almost happened. The visual design of Krusty is in effect evidence of a plot point that was never used. The same head shape, by the way, shows up in Futurama. Bender the robot has the same head shape as Homer and Krusty. Groening has used that basic skull silhouette as a kind of signature across his work. Once you see it, you start spotting it in Disenchantment too. The man has a thing for that shape. It's like a painter who keeps using the same color palette across different paintings. It's recognizable as his, right? Let me tell you about Lisa the Greek, because I think this is one of the loveliest small pieces of production trivia in the entire show. In a Season 3 episode called Lisa the Greek, Lisa demonstrates a remarkable ability to predict the outcomes of NFL games. The episode aired just before the Super Bowl in 1992, which was deliberate. Lisa picks a winning team at the end of the episode, and the ending was filmed specifically to align with that year's Super Bowl matchup. But here's the bit. Fox kept showing the episode every year before the Super Bowl as a kind of tradition. And every year, the producers would re-record the final couple of lines so that Lisa's prediction would reference whatever teams were actually playing in that year's game. Different teams every year. Lisa's prediction always aligned with the current Super Bowl, and according to the DVD commentary track, Lisa picked the winning team correctly every single year that the tradition continued. Which I find slightly suspicious because the odds of that happening by chance are quite low, but the writers swear it's true. They reportedly didn't even try to manipulate the predictions. They just had Lisa guess, and she kept being right. The Super Bowl re-recording tradition went on for about 3 years before it quietly stopped. But the original Lisa the Greek episode, in its various aired forms, contains the only recurring example I can think of in television history of an episode that was lightly edited and re-released annually to match real-world current events. That's a production decision that in 2026 sounds basically unthinkable. but in the early 90s, the network was happy to do it. Speaking of alternate endings, the most famous one in Simpsons history involves Who Shot Mr. Burns? This is a two-part episode that aired across Season 6 and Season 7. The first part, which aired in May of 1995, ends with Mr. Burns being shot by an unknown assailant. The show then took the summer off, and the second part, which aired in September, revealed the shooter. The whole thing was modeled on the famous Who Shot J.R. cliffhanger from Dallas a decade earlier. The mystery became, for the summer of 1995, a real piece of pop culture. There were betting pools, there were magazine cover stories. The Las Vegas casinos took bets on it. Now the producers were nervous about the leak. Animation is a slow business, and the actual reveal had to be sent overseas to be colored and finished months in advance. They knew the truth could potentially escape, so they did something extraordinary. They animated multiple alternate endings. The actual canonical answer to the mystery is that Maggie Simpson, the baby, shot Burns. She didn't mean to, exactly. It was an accident involving a struggle over a lollipop. But she pulled the trigger. The famous reveal scene has the gun in her hands. The producers, however, also recorded an alternate ending where Smithers turned out to be the shooter. That ending was animated, voiced, and basically completed. It was used in a 1995 special called Springfield's Most Wanted, a parody of America's Most Wanted that aired between the two parts of the cliffhanger to tease the mystery. The Smithers ending was shown in that special as a possibility, and to this day there's a faction of fans who feel it's the more emotionally satisfying answer. Smithers loved Burns more than anyone alive, and being driven to shoot him would have been a much darker, much more tragic reveal than the comic accident with Maggie. The show went with the comic version, which I think was the right call, but the Smithers alternate exists somewhere in a Fox vault as a sort of ghost ending to one of the most famous cliffhangers in television history. Here's a fun fact about the Simpsons movie. It came out in 2007 after years of false starts and abandoned attempts. But the producers had been thinking about a feature film basically from the early seasons. The Season 4 episode Camp Krusty, where Bart and Lisa get sent to a terrible summer camp run by Krusty as a money laundering operation, was originally pitched as a potential movie plot. The writers explored it as a feature, sat with it for a while, and eventually realized they couldn't stretch the idea to a full 80 or 90 minutes. There simply wasn't enough story, so they cut it back down and used the idea as a regular episode instead, and Camp Krusty is now considered one of the best half hours of the show's golden age. The movie they did eventually make, which came out 15 years after that conversation, had to be built from scratch as its own thing. I want to mention the very earliest character designs because they reportedly contain something genuinely strange. In the original concept sketches, before the family was finalized, Marge was supposed to have rabbit ears hidden under her hair. The plan was that this would be revealed in the final ever episode of the show, possibly as a callback to Groening's earlier work on the Life in Hell comic, which featured rabbits. Marge would pull off her wig in the closing scene, and there she'd be, secretly a rabbit, returning Groening's whole career to where it started. The plan obviously never came to anything. The show kept running, the final episode never happened, because the show is somehow still on the air. Marge remained, as far as we know, not a rabbit. But the rabbit ears were in some of the earliest sketches, and there's at least one bit of concept art floating around that shows the under-the-hair surprise. It's the kind of detail that the show probably wouldn't actually use now, even if there were a final episode, because the show has long since moved on from the Life in Hell connection. But it's there, in the early notes, as a strange potential ending that exists in some parallel version of the franchise. Here's a small one I love. There's a scene in the Season 5 episode Burns Air where Mr. Burns adopts Bart and various rich people house things happen. The episode was originally going to feature a robot version of the fitness celebrity Richard Simmons that goes haywire and starts attacking guests. The robot, Richard Simmons sequence was fully animated, voiced, the whole thing. Test audiences and the writers eventually decided it wasn't quite landing and cut it from the final episode. But apparently the cut scene has lived a strange afterlife at animation conventions and university lectures about The Simpsons, where it's shown to rapturous response. It works in those settings, it didn't work in the episode, so it sits in the vault, beloved by a tiny, dedicated audience, and almost completely unseen by the broader public. Now, the most controversial cut and shape change in the show's history is probably the principal and the pauper. I mentioned earlier that this is the episode where it's revealed that Principal Skinner is actually a man named Armin Tamzarian, who stole the real Seymour Skinner's identity after the Vietnam War. The Les Miserables Easter egg from years before suddenly turned into a full plot. The episode aired in season 9. The writer's room is, by all accounts, still divided about it. The episode was written by Ken Keeler, who has been one of the show's most distinguished writers, and who has said in interviews that he considers The Principal and The Pauper to be his best work. The then showrunners Bill Oakley and Josh Weinstein defend it, but Matt Groening has openly described it as one of his least favorite episodes. Harry Shearer, who voices Skinner, has condemned it for what he calls tossing the character in the trash can for no good reason. He has reportedly alleged that the writing staff acts even years later like the episode never happened. There's a much smaller follow-up moment in a later episode called Behind the Laughter, a parody of VH1's Behind the Music, in which the show explicitly references the Principal and the Pauper as gimmicky and nonsensical. The show was, in a meta-sense, apologizing to itself. That kind of internal disagreement is unusual to see in a long-running series. Most shows pretend their bad episodes never happened by just not talking about them. The Simpsons has, in a few places, openly bickered about its own canon. The Phil Hartman situation is a different kind of plot decision, and it's one I want to mention because it speaks to how the show handles loss. Phil Hartman was one of the most beloved recurring voice actors on the show, voicing Troy McClure, Lionel Hutz, and a number of smaller characters. He was murdered in 1998. The show made a deliberate, immediate decision not to recast his characters. Troy McClure and Lionel Hutz were retired. They have occasionally appeared as silent background figures in crowd scenes as a kind of acknowledgement, but they have never spoken again. Hartman had also reportedly agreed before his death to voice the character of Zapp Brannigan in Futurama, which was just being developed. When he died, Futurama recast the role with Billy West, but the broader Hartman tradition of leaving his characters retired has stayed in The Simpsons to this day. It's a quiet form of respect that I think speaks well of the show. The easier decision, commercially, would have been to bring in a sound-alike and keep the characters going. The show chose not to. One last detail before we move on. The writer's room has a specific process for deciding which jokes make it into a script. The rule, according to a Wisconsin public radio report and various Simpsons writers themselves, is roughly this. A joke has to make more than half the room laugh out loud. If it does, it goes into the script. Then the cast does a table read, and the joke has to get a laugh in the room a second time. Then there's a screening of the animatic weeks later, and the joke has to land a third time. If a joke fails any of those 3 screenings, it gets cut. The show producer Bonita Piatila has said that the writer's room discussions are some of the most polite she's ever seen. Nobody yells. Nobody insults each other. Everyone is, by her account, so smart and so good at their jobs that the conversations stay collegial and the disagreements stay civil. That kind of culture is rare in any creative environment, and especially rare in a writer's room that's had to keep producing 20-odd episodes a year for decade after decade. The fact that the show is still running is, in a quiet way, partly a product of the room being a place people genuinely like working. Right? Speaking of the writer's room, let's go meet some of the people who've actually worked in it because their stories are honestly half the reason the show works. There's a writer named John Swartzwelder, and if you've ever loved a Simpsons episode, you've probably loved one of his. I want to start with him because he's one of the strangest figures in modern American comedy, and I think he deserves more attention than he gets. Swartzwelder is the most prolific writer in the show's history. He has 59 credited episodes, which is more than anyone else on the staff by a significant margin. The next most prolific writers are in the high 30s. Swartzwelder is in his own tier. And he's done this while being almost completely invisible to the public. He has never given an interview, as far as I can tell. He refuses to record DVD commentary tracks. He has shown up to almost no public events for the show. He doesn't appear in photographs. The few images of him that exist online are mostly from the early 90s, and they're grainy and few in number. The man is a kind of ghost. The story I love most about Swartzwelder, and that I think tells you everything you need to know about him, is the one about the booth. Swartzwelder famously didn't like writing in the show's writer's room. He preferred to write alone in a diner with cigarettes and coffee. He'd sit in a particular booth at a particular diner in Los Angeles, smoke, drink coffee, and bang out Simpsons scripts in extended bursts. He worked best by his own description in that specific setup. The booth was his office. Then California outlawed smoking in restaurants. This was in 1995. The diners had to comply. The booth was no longer a place where Swartzwelder could smoke. So he did what any reasonable person would do, which is he bought the booth. He paid the diner for the actual physical piece of furniture, had it removed from the restaurant, and installed it in his own home. He continued writing in the same exact booth in his own house, smoking freely as if nothing had changed. When smoking was eventually banned in the Simpsons writers' room as well, Swartzwelder reportedly stopped showing up. He kept writing scripts. He kept submitting them. The other writers would discuss the scripts in the room while Swartzwelder remained at home, in his booth, doing his thing. He kept this up for years. His writing colleagues, according to various DVD commentary tracks, describe him with a kind of reverent affection. Former writer Dan Graney has called him the greatest writer in the English language in any form. Other writers have described his approach to comedy as so peculiar and so specific that nobody else on the show could really imitate it. His episodes have a particular voice. They lean into absurdity in a way the rest of the show doesn't quite. Episodes like Whacking Day, The Old Man and the Lisa, Homer the Vigilante, Bart the Murderer, these are all Swartzwelder pieces. The fingerprints are subtle, but if you know what you're looking for, you can spot them. Swartzwelder, by various accounts, is also a serious libertarian and a self-declared anti-environmentalist. There are stories of him going on long tangents in the writer's room about how there's actually more rainforest now than there was 100 years ago, an argument I will not be litigating tonight. And yet he wrote some of the show's most environmentally conscious episodes. The Old Man and the Lisa is about Mr. Burns being financially destroyed and rebuilding his fortune in a way that involves industrial environmental damage. Whacking Day is about the slaughter of snakes for a town festival. The contrast between his stated politics and the moral arcs of his episodes is one of the more interesting puzzles in his career. Maybe he was just doing the job. Maybe he was writing characters he disagreed with on purpose. Maybe his politics were less rigid than the writer's room banter made them sound. Hard to say. He doesn't do interviews. Since leaving the show in 2003, Swartzwelder has written 11 novels, all of them apparently brilliant and absurd. They're hard to find in proper bookshops, but they exist. He has become a kind of cult figure in the comedy writing world. Other writers reference him in their work. He shows up in animated cameo form in The Simpsons itself, as a tribute. He is, as much as anyone can be, the patron saint of the show. Now, Conan O'Brien. Conan was a writer on the show from 1991 to 1993, which is a relatively short stint, but he wrote some of the most beloved episodes in the entire run. His credits are Marge vs. the Monorail, Homer Goes to College, New Kid on the Block, and Treehouse of Horror Before. 4 episodes, all 4 are considered classics. Honestly, if you wrote those 4 episodes and nothing else, your career in comedy would be entirely justified. Marge vs. the Monorail is the one most people bring up first. The plot is that Springfield gets a windfall of $3 million from Mr. Burns being fined for dumping nuclear waste, and a smooth-talking con artist named Lyle Lanley shows up to convince the town to spend the money on building a monorail system. The episode is genuinely one of the funniest pieces of television ever made. The monorail song that Lanley uses to hypnotize the town into the project is, by my count, one of the catchiest things ever sung in an animated show. Conan reportedly wrote the song almost entirely himself, leaning on his own background in sketch comedy at Harvard, where he was president of the Lampoon. The song's structure, an upbeat Carnival Barker pitch that swells into a town-wide group sing-along, was directly modeled on The Music Man. There's a Phil Hartman moment in the episode that's worth flagging. Hartman voices Lyle Lanley, the con artist. His delivery is so good that you can't really imagine anyone else saying those lines. Is there a chance the track could bend? Not on your life, my Hindu friend exchange. The way he stretches monorail out across the chorus. The calm pride with which he sells a deadly piece of infrastructure to the town. All of it is Hartman at the absolute top of his powers. Conan's writing and Hartman's performance and the episode's tight construction came together to make something genuinely great. It's the kind of episode that makes you think comedy might be a serious art form after all. Homer Goes to College is the second of Conan's credits and is also widely considered one of the show's best ever episodes. The premise is that Homer fails a workplace certification and has to attend college to keep his job. He shows up at Springfield University expecting it to be like Animal House, and is bitterly disappointed when it turns out to be, a college. The episode is built around the comic gap between the cartoon idea of college and the actual thing, with Homer trying and failing to make his real life conform to his movie expectations. It's a kind of meta-joke about pop culture reference points, which is very Conan. New Kid on the Block is the underrated one. It's the episode where Bart falls in love with the older girl next door, voiced by Sarah Gilbert. It's quieter than the other 3 Conan episodes. There's no big musical number, no big absurd twist. It's a small story about a small heartbreak. And it's a really beautifully written piece of television. The dialogue between Bart and Laura, the new neighbor, is tender in a way the show doesn't always allow itself to be. There's a famous bit at the end where Laura is on the phone, putting it down so she can react to something Bart says off camera, and the moment is shot like a small piece of romantic comedy. Conan claimed he didn't actually write much of this one, but his name's on it. Treehouse of Horror 4 is the 4th, and Conan's contribution to that one is the linking material between segments, the bit where Bart guides us through an art gallery and introduces each scary story by showing a painting. Bart walks past parodies of famous paintings, including ones by Van Gogh and Dali and Edvard Munch. The setup is charming. Marge interrupts at one point to suggest the audience might want to listen to the Orson Welles' War of the Worlds, broadcast on NPR instead. The transitions are so smooth that they hold the whole anthology together. It's a small piece of writing craft that the show could have done badly and didn't. There are a few other writers worth mentioning briefly. Greg Daniels was a Simpsons writer in the early 90s before going on to create the American version of The Office, which is, just another huge piece of television. Judd Apatow, the future film director, reportedly wrote a Simpsons spec script in the early days where Homer gets hypnotized into thinking he's a 10-year-old. He sent it everywhere, including to The Simpsons itself, and got no job offers. He went on to do all right. George Meyer, less famous but considered by many writers to be one of the most important comedic minds the show ever had, is responsible for an absurd number of the jokes you remember from the early seasons. Mike Rice and Al Jean ran the show together in seasons 3 and 4, and the room they assembled is considered the strongest in animation history. Now let me tell you about the Harvard and Yale contingent, because this is one of the genuinely strange things about the show. A startling number of Simpsons writers have advanced degrees in mathematics. Ken Keeler has a PhD in applied mathematics from Harvard. Jeff Westbrook has a PhD in computer science from Princeton. David X. Cohen has a master's in computer science from Berkeley. Al Jean studied mathematics at Harvard. Mike Rice came out of the Harvard Lampoon. The room has, at various points, had more advanced math degrees than the average university department. The reason this matters is that the writers, particularly in the middle seasons, have buried real mathematical jokes in the show as background gags. There's a chalkboard scene in the season 10 episode The Wizard of Evergreen Terrace, where Homer writes out an equation that looks like a counterexample to Fermat's last theorem. The numbers, if you plug them into a calculator that doesn't have full precision, appear to actually solve the equation. They don't, technically, because there's a tiny error in the 17th decimal place or wherever, but to a normal pocket calculator, the result looks like a refutation of one of the most famous mathematical proofs in history. The joke is for the audience members who happen to know that this is impossible, and who would therefore appreciate the cheek of putting it on screen. There's another moment, a baseball game, where the crowd attendance figures shown on the scoreboard are all perfect numbers, or narcissistic numbers, or some other specific mathematical category. The writers have done full lectures on the math jokes, by the way. Simon Singh wrote an entire book called The Simpsons and Their Mathematical Secrets, breaking down every buried equation across the show's run. It's a genuinely good read if you're awake and want to chase the rabbit hole. The James L. Brooks Emmy thing is, as I mentioned earlier, that he holds the all-time record for most primetime Emmys won by a single person. 12 of those Emmys are for The Simpsons specifically. The rest are from his earlier work on shows like The Mary Tyler Moore Show, Lou Grant, and Taxi. Brooks is, in a slightly understated way, one of the most decorated television producers in the history of the medium. He doesn't really self-promote. He just shows up to award shows and quietly wins more trophies than anyone else. I also want to mention briefly that the room has been remarkably stable over the years, which is part of why the show has kept its voice. Al Jean has been the showrunner for most of the run, from season 13 through season 32 as the sole showrunner. That's 19 consecutive seasons of one person setting the tone. Matt Selman, who's currently running the show and who took over fully in season 38, was a writer on the show going back to the late 90s. He's been there for nearly 30 years. The writer's room has been a kind of professional home for some of these people for their entire adult lives. They've watched each other have children, get married, get divorced, lose parents, get older. And in the middle of all that, every week they make jokes about a yellow family. The collegiality of the room, which we touched on briefly in the last section, is part of why this kind of long-term stability is possible. People who work there mostly want to stay. Mike Rice has written a book about his time on the show called Springfield Confidential, and it's full of small, generous observations about how the room actually operated. It's worth reading if you're awake. Honestly, it's worth reading even if you're half asleep. One final story before we move on. The writer's room used to have a tradition where, when an episode aired for the first time, the whole room would watch it together, just sit there, lights down, all of them in one screening room with the cast and the crew, watching their work go out into the world for the first time. That tradition has mostly faded as the production has become more remote and more dispersed. But for the first couple of decades of the show, that was how the room celebrated. A weekly screening, no fanfare, just the people who'd made the thing watching it land. There's something quiet and lovely about that, right? Let's leave the writer's room and go meet some of the guest stars, because the list of people who've shown up on this show in cameo roles is honestly absurd. The Simpsons holds the Guinness World Record for most guest stars featured in a single television series. As of about 2020, the official count was 810 unique guest stars. It's likely well over that by now. For context, most successful network shows might have a few dozen named guest appearances across their entire run. The Simpsons has, on average, picked up something like 20 named guest stars a season for its full run. The reason the show could pull that off comes down to a few factors. The first is that everyone in Hollywood wanted to be on it. From basically the second season onward, being asked to voice a character on The Simpsons was a kind of cultural validation that nearly every actor and musician and politician and athlete in America wanted. The list of people who reportedly turned the show down is incredibly short. Most people said yes, many of them said yes immediately, without checking what the script was. And the show could afford this because the work itself, voice acting in a booth, requires almost no time commitment compared to a live-action guest appearance. You drop in for an afternoon, you record your lines, you go home. The booking process is, by industry standards, extraordinarily easy. Let me start with what might be the strangest guest appearance in the show's history, which is Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson appears in the Season 3 premiere, an episode called Stark Raving Dad. He voices a character named Leon Kompowski, a large white man in a mental institution who believes he is Michael Jackson. The conceit is that Leon is not actually Michael Jackson, just a fan who has decided to be him. And the show plays the comedy of Bart befriending this character without realizing he's not the real thing. Except, of course, the speaking voice of Leon is in fact Michael Jackson, the actual Michael Jackson. Recording the role. There's a contractual twist. Jackson was credited in the episode under the pseudonym John J. Smith. He couldn't use his real name because of his record deal at the time, which would have created legal complications around his appearance on a Fox property. So they invented a fake name and credited him under that. The episode aired with a mysterious John J. Smith listed in the credits, and nobody outside the show really knew it was Jackson. The rumor, of course, spread quickly. By the time the episode was out for a few weeks, most people had figured it out. There's a second contractual twist. Jackson did all of Leon's speaking voice, but he did not actually sing in the episode. The Leon Kompowski character has a few singing moments, and Jackson, for whatever combination of legal and creative reasons, didn't sing them. The singing voice was performed by Kip Lennon, a sound-alike who did such a good impression of Jackson that most viewers couldn't tell the difference. So you've got a Michael Jackson guest appearance in which the speaking voice is real Michael Jackson and the singing voice is a sound-alike. It's bizarre. It's a level of contractual weirdness that I can't quite get my head around, even after reading about it multiple times. The Stark Raving Dad story has, since 2019, taken a sadder turn. Following the HBO documentary Leaving Neverland and renewed scrutiny of Jackson's history of alleged abuse, The producers of The Simpsons made the decision to permanently pull Stark Raving Dad from circulation. The episode is no longer available on Disney+. It is not in syndication. It has been effectively erased from the canonical run of the show. This was a deliberate ethical decision by the producers, and it has not been reversed. The episode exists on old DVDs and in fan archives, but as a piece of officially licensed Simpsons content, it is gone. There's a connected detail about Jackson that I want to mention because it ties into a separate piece of the show's history. In 1990, the show released an album called The Simpsons Sing the Blues. The lead single from that album was Do the Bartman, a Bart-led dance track that became a genuine hit. It topped charts in multiple countries. The composer of record was a man named Brian Loren, who was credited as the sole songwriter. Years later, in 1998, Matt Groening admitted in interviews that Do the Bartman had actually been co-written and co-produced by Michael Jackson. Jackson had been an enormous fan of the show and had gotten involved with the album behind the scenes, but had been unable to take credit because of his contracts with Sony. So a #1 hit single, sold globally, with Michael Jackson's name nowhere on the credits, was substantially his work. It's the kind of thing that if you didn't know, you'd have no way of knowing, which is sort of the point. Right, let me move on because I could spend a whole section on Jackson, and I want to talk about other guests too. Dustin Hoffman appeared in the Season 2 episode Lisa's Substitute as the character of Mr. Bergstrom, a substitute teacher who briefly becomes Lisa's intellectual hero. The episode is, in my honest opinion, one of the most emotionally affecting half hours of television ever made. Hoffman voices the character with so much warmth and intelligence that the goodbye scene at the end of the episode genuinely hurts to watch. Hoffman, like Jackson, was credited under a pseudonym, in his case Sam Eddick, which is a play on the word Semitic. It's a small piece of in-joke acknowledgement of Hoffman's Jewish background baked right into his fake credit. The pseudonym tradition continued for a while after that. Various other guest stars who couldn't be credited for contractual reasons appeared under fake names. Elizabeth Taylor was credited normally for her Maggie line, by the way, in case anyone is wondering. We touched on that earlier. She got the proper credit for the single word. The Frasier connection in The Simpsons is one of my favorite small pieces of Hollywood interconnection. Kelsey Grammer voices Sideshow Bob, the show's recurring villain, the failed second banana clown turned criminal mastermind. Sideshow Bob has appeared in something like 20-plus episodes over the years and is one of the most beloved guest characters in the show's history. His voice is unmistakable. Grammer does the character with an enormous amount of theatrical menace, leaning into the Shakespearean monologuing and the soft purring threats and the operatic singing voice. It's a properly great vocal performance. Now here's the layered bit. Sideshow Bob has a brother on the show named Cecil Terwilliger. Cecil is voiced by David Hyde Pierce. David Hyde Pierce played Frasier Crane's brother Niles Crane on the show Frasier for 11 seasons. So Kelsey Grammer's character on The Simpsons has a brother voiced by Kelsey Grammer's actual on-screen brother from his other long-running television show. The casting was deliberate. The producers wanted that specific dynamic, the slightly fussy, academic-flavored sibling rivalry, and they got the actual actor who'd been perfecting that dynamic with Grammer for years. And then it goes one layer further. Sideshow Bob and Cecil have a father in one episode, voiced by John Mahoney. John Mahoney played Frasier and Niles' father, Martin Crane, on Frasier. Same actor, same family role. So The Simpsons effectively cast the actual cast of Frasier as the Terwilliger family. The three Crane men become the three Terwilliger men. It's a piece of casting so deliberate and so internally satisfying that I have a hard time believing nobody had thought of it before The Simpsons did it. But apparently it was a fresh idea at the time and it worked beautifully. Johnny Cash voiced the Space Coyote in the Season 8 episode El Viaje Misterioso de Nuestro Homer, which is the famous chili pepper hallucination episode. Homer eats some absurdly hot Guatemalan peppers and ends up wandering through a Carlos Castaneda-style desert dream sequence where he meets a wise coyote who tells him to find his soulmate. The coyote is Johnny Cash. Cash recorded the part in a single afternoon by various accounts. The lines are delivered with that famous gravelly authority that he brought to absolutely everything. The whole sequence holds together because of his voice. Without Cash, the dream might have felt cartoonish. With him, it feels like Homer is genuinely getting a message from the universe, I think it's one of the most successful single guest appearances in the show's history. Now, the Paul and Linda McCartney story is worth telling carefully because it has a really lovely condition attached to it. The McCartneys appeared in the season 7 episode Lisa the Vegetarian, where Lisa decides to stop eating meat after meeting Apu at a vegetarian rooftop garden. Paul and Linda voice themselves, hanging out on the rooftop of the Quick E-Mart with Apu. The episode is one of the most beloved in the show's run. The McCartneys had one absolute condition for appearing. Linda McCartney had been a vegetarian for years, and she was deeply committed to advocacy on the issue. The condition for their appearance was that Lisa had to remain vegetarian for the rest of the show's run. She could not have an episode where she went back to eating meat. They were not going to lend their voices to a piece of media that would be undermined by a subsequent storyline. The show agreed, and remarkably, the show kept its promise. Lisa Simpson has been a vegetarian, canonically, since that episode in 1995. 31 years, through every showrunner change, every writer's room turnover, every gradual shift in the show's character. Her vegetarianism remains. Occasionally, a writer will joke about pushing her toward meat, and the producers will quietly remind them about the McCartney promise. It is, in television terms, one of the longest honored character commitments in the medium. Most shows can't keep their characters consistent for 2 seasons, let alone 3 decades. The Simpsons has kept Lisa off meat because Paul and Linda McCartney asked them to. Linda McCartney died in 1998. Paul has continued to be involved with various Simpsons-adjacent things over the years. The promise has outlived its original makers. There's something deeply respectful about that, and I think it speaks well of the show. Albert Brooks is the recurring guest voice you might not realize has been on the show as often as he has. Brooks plays Hank Scorpio, the villain in You Only Move Twice, which is widely considered one of the best episodes ever made. He plays Jacques in Life on the Fast Lane. He plays the EPA villain Russ Cargill in the 2007 Simpsons movie. And he plays a number of smaller one-off characters across the run. Brooks's working style is, by various accounts, almost entirely improvised. He shows up to the studio, gets a script, reads it once, then proceeds to ad-lib for hours. The producers reportedly let him do this because he's brilliant, but the editing process becomes a nightmare. They have to listen back through hours of takes and select the best moments and stitch them into something resembling a coherent performance. Most of his most famous lines, including the most quoted bits from Hank Scorpio, were apparently invented in the moment. He's that kind of performer. The script is a starting point, and where he ends up is somewhere else entirely. Leonard Nimoy showed up on the show twice. Once in Marge vs. the Monorail, where he plays himself as the celebrity guest of the monorail opening ceremony. He delivers what might be the single most quoted Nimoy line outside of Star Trek. A solar eclipse. The cosmic ballet goes on. His pause before goes on is so perfect, so completely Nimoy in its dignified weirdness, that it became a meme for years before the word meme was even widely used. Nimoy's second appearance is in the Springfield Files, the X-Files crossover episode. He shows up at the end to deliver another deadpan piece of cosmic wisdom. The man understood exactly what the show needed from him and gave it every time he turned up. He is, sadly, no longer with us. But those 2 performances will outlive everyone involved. Stephen Hawking appeared on The Simpsons more times than most people realize. He's in at least 4 episodes. He voiced himself each time. By all accounts, the production accommodated his physical needs and his communication setup with extraordinary care. Hawking apparently loved the show and considered the appearances some of the most fun he had in his public life. There's a scene in one episode where Hawking floats out of a wheelchair with rocket boosters built into the wheels. He apparently insisted on keeping that gag in. He found it funny. Elon Musk appeared in a season 26 episode called The Musk Who Fell to Earth. The episode is, in my opinion, not one of the show's better outings, but it exists as a curiosity. It's a portrait of Musk from a particular cultural moment before public sentiment about him became more complicated, and watching it now is a slightly strange experience. The show has, in general, been quite good at not over-promoting tech billionaires, but this episode is an exception. Lady Gaga appeared in a season 23 episode called Lisa Goes Gaga, which holds the unique distinction of being one of the lowest-rated episodes in the entire show's history. The episode is widely considered a piece of celebrity flattery rather than a story, and most fans wish it didn't exist. But Lady Gaga is there, voicing herself in the official canonical record. There are dozens more, hundreds more that I could mention. Tom Hanks shows up in the 2007 Simpsons movie, voicing himself in a single brief scene where he serves as the spokesman for the EPA's plan to relocate Springfield. His line, that America has lost so much credibility that it has to borrow some of his, is one of the smartest pieces of celebrity self-awareness in the film. I won't try to do a full list. There isn't time. The guest stars are part of the texture of the show. They wash through it. Some are remembered, most are forgotten. And the show keeps booking new ones. Right. Let's wander over to the predictions corner now because we have to talk about that at some point, and I'd rather get it out of the way than save it. Okay, the predictions. We have to talk about the predictions. I want to be honest with you about this whole topic up front because it's one of those areas where the internet has done its usual thing of taking a real and interesting phenomenon and steadily exaggerating it into something almost entirely fictional. The Simpsons predicted X is one of the most worn-out internet jokes by now. There's a viral image somewhere about every single major news event of the past 20 years claiming The Simpsons predicted it. Most of those images are fake. A real chunk of them are real. And the reason it's confusing is that the real ones are interesting enough that the fake ones feel plausible. So tonight I want to walk through the predictions, real and otherwise, and try to be straight about which are which. I'm not going to tell you the show is psychic. I'm also not going to tell you the predictions are all rubbish. The truth is somewhere in the middle, and the middle is, in my experience, more interesting than either of the extremes. Let me start with the most famous one, Donald Trump as President of the United States. The episode is called Bart to the Future. It aired on the 19th of March, 2000. The plot is that Bart sees a vision of his own adult life in which he's a failed musician, and Lisa is the President of the United States, having to clean up the country's finances after the previous administration ran it into the ground. In one passing line, Lisa as president references inheriting quite a budget crunch from President Trump. That's it, that's the line. Trump as president mentioned in passing 16 years before he was actually elected. The joke at the time was that Trump becoming president was so absurd that it would clearly be a disaster, which is why Lisa was inheriting the wreckage. The writer of the episode, Dan Graney, has said in interviews that he chose Trump specifically as a shorthand for an outlandish scenario, the kind of person you'd never expect to actually be president. The joke landed differently in 2000 than it landed in 2016. Graney has said publicly that he didn't enjoy being right. So that one is real. The line exists. The episode is canonical. The Simpsons did, in a sense, predict Trump's presidency, although what they were actually doing was making fun of the idea by treating it as the worst possible outcome. The internet took a satirical joke and turned it into a prophecy, which is a thing the internet does. Next up, the 2019 Disney acquisition of Fox. In a 1998 episode called When You Dish Upon a Star, there's a brief shot of 20th Century Fox's corporate logo as it appears on a sign on a Hollywood lot. Underneath the Fox logo, in smaller text, the sign reads, "A division of Walt Disney Company." It was a 1-second background gag at the time, a joke about Disney's relentless corporate expansion, included as a fairly obvious throwaway visual. The idea was that if Disney kept buying companies, eventually they'd own everyone, including Fox. In 2019, the Walt Disney Company bought 21st Century Fox in a deal worth around $71 billion. The Fox studio became a division of the Walt Disney Company. That sign from 1998 was, 21 years later, technically correct. It's now displayed as a slightly eerie historical artifact in various YouTube videos and articles. The Simpsons writers themselves have said this one was just a satirical guess. They were riffing on a real trend in corporate consolidation. They didn't predict anything exactly. They observed a direction and projected it forward to its logical absurdity, and the logical absurdity happened to come true, which is, I think, the most accurate way to describe most of the show's predictions. The writers were paying attention to where the world was going. The world kept going there, so the predictions land. The smartwatch one is a bit harder to nail down precisely. In the season 6 episode Lisa's Wedding, which aired in 1995, we see a flash forward to Lisa's adult life. She's in her early 20s, about to be married. The world around her is full of small technological touches that the show was using to suggest the future. Among those touches, Lisa is shown using what appears to be a wrist-based communicator. People talk to each other through wristwatches that have small screens and can transmit voice. The Apple Watch came out in 2015, 20 years later, and looks broadly similar. This one is, in the honest accounting, not really a prediction. Wristwatch communicators were already a science fiction staple by 1995. Dick Tracy had a wristwatch radio in the 1940s. Star Trek had communicator badges. The idea that future technology would let people communicate through wrist-based devices was, by the mid-90s, a fairly common piece of speculative imagery. The Simpsons used it because it was a natural piece of futuristic visual shorthand. They didn't predict the Apple Watch. They borrowed an existing genre trope. Whether the genre trope itself predicted the Apple Watch is a more interesting question, but it's not really a Simpsons-specific thing. The autocorrect one from the same Lisa's Wedding episode is more genuinely funny. There's a gag where a kid in the future tries to type "beat up Martin" into a portable electronic device, and the device autocorrects it to "eat up Martha." This is structurally exactly how autocorrect failures work on phones today. Wrong words substituted and based on probabilistic guessing. The show was making fun of a hypothetical future technology, and the actual technology that arrived years later did exactly the thing the show had mocked. That's an honest prediction. The writers were imagining a future absurdity, and the absurdity became real. Three-eyed fish is one I love. In the Season 2 episode, 2 Cars in Every Garage and 3 Eyes on Every Fish, a fisherman catches a mutated three-eyed fish in the river downstream of Mr. Burns' nuclear power plant. The fish becomes a recurring symbol on the show. It's called Blinky. In 2011, a real three-eyed fish was caught in a reservoir in Argentina, downstream of a real nuclear power plant. The fish made the news. People joked about Blinky. The Simpsons had, in a slightly absurd way, predicted not just the existence of mutated fish in nuclear-adjacent water, but the specific shape of the mutation. Whether the fish was genuinely affected by radiation or was just an unusual specimen is a question I'll leave to biologists. But the photograph that made the rounds online in 2011 looked uncannily like Blinky. The Greek debt crisis prediction is small but real. A 2012 episode contained a passing line about Greece's financial troubles, framed as a joke about the country defaulting on its debts. Within months of the episode airing, headlines actually began describing exactly the scenario the joke had referenced. The episode was written months before the headlines because of the long animation pipeline I mentioned earlier, so the writers were making a topical joke that happened to land before the topic itself fully arrived. The faulty voting machine one comes from Treehouse of Horror 99, which aired in 2008, just before the Obama versus McCain presidential election. There's a segment where Homer tries to vote for Obama, and the voting machine flips his vote to McCain. In the years since, there have been actual documented cases of voting machine errors flipping votes from one candidate to another in real elections. The specifics are different. The general pattern is similar enough that the Halloween gag turned out to be, in its broad shape, true. Now, let me tell you about some of the predictions that get attributed to the show but aren't actually real, because I think it's only fair. There is no Simpsons episode that predicted COVID-19. The viral image you may have seen showing a panel with Bart and Lisa standing in front of a coronavirus headline is fake. It was assembled from screenshots of unrelated episodes. The actual episode that gets cited as a COVID prediction is Margin Chains from Season 4, about a fictional Japanese flu called Osaka flu that spreads via shipped goods. That episode does exist, but it's a generic pandemic comedy, not anything specific to COVID. The viral mashups online overstate the connection considerably. There's also no Simpsons episode that specifically predicted the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022. The image that circulated showing this is also a fabrication. Similar story with the Notre Dame fire, with the Trump Tower attack, with the death of various celebrities. Most of the "they predicted X" memes that get traction on social media are doctored or pulled out of context. The honest reason there are so many real predictions is the sheer volume of the show. 788 episodes, give or take. Each episode contains roughly 200 jokes. So the total joke count across the show's run is somewhere in the neighborhood of 150,000. 150,000 individual gags about contemporary life. If you write that many jokes about every aspect of the modern world, statistically, some of them are going to come true. That's just how big numbers work. It's not magic. It's the law of large numbers applied to a 36-year-old writer's room with above-average satirical instincts. There's also something worth saying about the writers themselves because I think it explains a lot. Many of the Simpsons writers, particularly the ones from the late 90s and early 2000s, came out of Ivy League educations with strong backgrounds in current affairs, economics, science, and political theory. The Harvard contingent and the Yale contingent and the math people, all of them were paying attention to where things were headed. They were reading the same news that you were reading. They were thinking about the same trends you were thinking about. The difference is that they were turning their observations into jokes for a television show with a global audience. So when the show predicts something, it's usually because a smart person noticed something coming, made a joke about it, and the something arrived. The Disney-Fox merger was visible from a mile away if you read the entertainment trade press in the mid-90s. Trump as a potential political figure was visible from a mile away if you watched any of his self-promoting public appearances in the 80s and 90s. The autocorrect gag came from people who were already familiar with predictive text systems on early word processors. The voting machine joke came from writers who'd been reading about voting integrity controversies for years. The show isn't psychic, the show is just paying attention. There is, however, one final layer to this that I find genuinely fascinating, and that's the way the Simpsons predictions phenomenon has changed the actual writing of the show. The writers know at this point that anything they put on screen could potentially go viral as a prediction if the world happens to bend that way later. There are reports that newer episodes occasionally include deliberately predictive gags just to mess with the internet, jokes about future scenarios that the writers think might land if the right kind of news cycle hits. It's a small piece of meta-commentary baked into the writing. The show is now aware of its reputation as a prophet, and is occasionally playing with that reputation by pretending to predict things on purpose, which is, I think, the perfect contemporary state for the show to be in. Once it stopped being a satire of America and became a piece of America that satirizes itself, things like this were inevitable. The show is in the conversation is partly about the show. The predictions are partly real, partly fabricated, partly self-aware, partly accidental. It's all happening at the same time. One more story before we close this section. There's a fan theory, which I've seen go viral several times, that the Simpsons writers worked with actual time travelers. I'm not going to dignify that with a response, but I will say this. The fact that a fan theory like that has enough traction online to be discussed at all is, in itself, evidence of how much cultural weight the show has accumulated. Most television shows can't generate even one credible conspiracy theory about themselves. The Simpsons has several. They are all wrong, but they exist, and the fact that they exist is, in its own way, a kind of compliment to the writer's room. People wouldn't bother making up time travel theories about a show they didn't love. Right, let's leave the predictions corner and walk over to the corner where the show actually changed how people talk. Because the language stuff, the catchphrases, the words that entered the dictionary, the slang the show pushed into the global vocabulary, that's, I think, a more interesting form of cultural impact than the predictions ever were. I want to start this section by trying to estimate how many words you've said in your life that originated on The Simpsons. I don't have a real number, obviously, because that's not a calculable thing, but I'm willing to guess that it's higher than you'd intuitively assume. The show has, over the years, quietly pushed dozens of words and phrases into the global English vocabulary, some of them so successfully that you probably don't even associate them with the show anymore. They're just part of how people talk now. Let me run through some of them casually, the way you'd run through a list of things at a pub when you're trying to remember which ones are real. We already talked about Homer's dough and its place in the Oxford English Dictionary, so I won't dwell on it again. Brief callback. The grunt is in the dictionary. Moving on. Meh. This word is older than The Simpsons. It existed in print and in casual usage well before 1989. But the show is largely responsible for pushing it into mainstream global English. Bart uses it in various early episodes, and Lisa uses it in a season 12 episode called Hungry Homer, where she expresses general teenage indifference with a single dismissive syllable. The line went viral in a pre-viral sense. People who'd never heard the word started using it. By the late 2000s, meh was in dictionaries around the world. The Collins English Dictionary added it as a word of the year in 2008, citing The Simpsons specifically. So while the show didn't invent it, the show did, in a real sense, make it travel. Ambiment and cromulent are the two famous fake words from the Season 7 episode, Lisa the Iconoclast. The episode involves Lisa investigating the actual history of Springfield's founder, Jebediah Springfield, and discovering he was a fraud. There's a moment where two teachers at Springfield Elementary discuss the town's motto, "A noble spirit embiggens the smallest man." One teacher remarks that she'd never heard the word embiggen before moving to Springfield. The other replies, "It's a perfectly cromulent word." Both words are jokes. Embiggen sounds like a made-up Latin-y construction. Cromulent sounds like an academic adjective. Neither existed before the episode. They were invented for that single scene by the writer David X. Cohen as a small piece of 19th century sounding faux vocabulary. Then a remarkable thing happened. People started using the words seriously. Embiggen appeared in scientific papers as a deliberate joke that the editors let through. It started showing up in news articles, in casual conversation, in tech jargon. By the 2010s, it was being used unironically by people who'd never seen the episode, as if it were just a normal word. In 2018, embiggen was officially added to the Merriam-Webster dictionary. Same year, cromulent was added to the Oxford English Dictionary. Both fake words, invented for a 1-second background gag, are now formally recognized pieces of the English language. They have crossed over from fiction into reality. The Simpsons writers, accidentally and slightly drunk on their own cleverness, expanded the language. Cheese-eating surrender monkeys is one I find genuinely fascinating because it crossed from a comedy show into actual political journalism. The phrase is delivered by groundskeeper Willie in the Season 7 episode Round Springfield, in a passing moment where Willie is grumbling about substitute teachers. He refers to the French as cheese-eating surrender monkeys in a single throwaway line that was, by the writer's admission, just a one-time joke. In 2003, during the run-up to the Iraq War, the phrase started appearing in actual newspaper opinion columns. It was used with apparent seriousness by conservative American journalists to describe France's reluctance to join the war effort. The original Simpsons writer who'd coined the phrase, Ken Keeler, has talked about how strange it was to see his throwaway joke become a piece of geopolitical commentary. It was being used in op-eds, it was being said on cable news. It was briefly a real piece of political vocabulary, deployed without any apparent awareness of where it came from. The phrase eventually faded from political usage, but it remains in some quarters as a piece of language that crossed from comedy into earnestness with potentially regrettable consequences. "Eat my shorts" is one of Bart's earliest catchphrases. It predates The Simpsons by quite a lot, actually. Nancy Cartwright used it as a teenager in her own life. When she was cast as Bart, she brought the phrase with her, and it became one of his trademark sayings. So the line you've heard a million times is, in a literal sense, a piece of Cartwright's personal teenage vocabulary that she imported into the most famous animated boy in television history. There's something I find deeply charming about that. The voice and the words came in together as a package. Bart's "I didn't do it" catchphrase has a really interesting layer to it. In the Season 5 episode Bart Gets Famous, Bart accidentally becomes a celebrity for delivering the line, "I didn't do it," in response to a clumsy mistake on a television show. The line goes viral within the show's universe. Bart becomes a one-hit wonder celebrity built entirely around that single phrase. People start expecting him to say it constantly, and he becomes exhausted by his own catchphrase. Eventually his fame fades. The episode is, in itself, a piece of meta-commentary on catchphrase culture. The Simpsons in 1994 was already aware of the cultural machinery that turns shows into catchphrase factories. "Eat my shorts" and "Ay caramba" were Bart's actual catchphrases. The show was already feeling the pressure of having those phrases printed on t-shirts and lunchboxes and bedroom posters. So they wrote an episode about it. The catchphrase about being unable to escape your catchphrase. It's properly clever, and it's the kind of thing the show doesn't get enough credit for doing. Other catchphrases worth mentioning. "Excellent," with Burns slowly steepling his fingers. "Ha ha," from Nelson Muntz, delivered with cruel pleasure as he points at someone's misfortune. "Don't have a cow, man," from Bart. followed by some food item from Homer, which has been used so many times in so many forms that it's basically its own dialect. Worst episode ever. From Comic Book Guy, which became the template for an entire genre of internet criticism, deployed in pseudo-punctuated form whenever someone wants to declare anything the worst version of itself. Why you little... From Homer while strangling Bart, which is a whole separate conversation we'll come to. Hi everybody. From Dr. Nick Riviera, met with the responding, "Hi Dr. Nick," from his patients, is one of those small ritual exchanges that's been quoted in real medical environments. People who work in medicine have told me they use the call and response in real situations, semi-jokingly, with patients who they suspect will get the reference. It's a piece of fictional dialogue that has become part of actual professional culture, right? Let's wander over to the Bush feud because this one is properly real and properly bizarre. In 1990, then First Lady Barbara Bush gave an interview with People magazine in which she described The Simpsons as the dumbest thing I had ever seen. That's a direct quote. The First Lady of the United States, in a major weekly magazine, calling a popular animated sitcom the dumbest thing she had ever seen. The Simpsons writers, far from being offended, were apparently delighted. They wrote a polite letter back to Mrs. Bush in the voice of Marge Simpson defending the family's values. Mrs. Bush wrote back, also in character, apologizing for her words and saying she'd been hasty. There's a real exchange of letters between the actual First Lady of the United States and a fictional cartoon mother in the formal archives of the White House. I find that completely wonderful. The Bush feud escalated in 1992. President George H.W. Bush, in a campaign speech, said, "We are going to keep on trying to strengthen the American family, to make American families a lot more like the Waltons and a lot less like the Simpsons." It was a fairly pointed shot, framing The Simpsons as a symbol of family decline. The Simpsons' response came the very next time the show aired. It was a rerun, and the producers added a new opening to the broadcast. The family is shown watching Bush's speech on television, and Bart, looking up from the screen, says, "Hey, we're just like the Waltons. We're praying for an end to the Depression, too." It's a perfect response. Pointed, polite, devastating. It got laughs from people across the political spectrum. A few years later, in Season 7, the show went further. The episode Two Bad Neighbors imagines George H.W. Bush moving in next door to The Simpsons after losing his re-election. Bush spends the episode feuding with Bart, refusing to admit that the show's portrayal of him is fair, eventually getting into a literal punching match in the front yard. The episode is a piece of comic revenge against an actual sitting president. It exists in the canon. It is, as far as I'm aware, one of the very few times a real name sitting or former US president has been portrayed as a recurring character in a popular network comedy. The fact that Bush couldn't really respond because he was no longer in office and his attempts to engage would only make him look worse is part of what makes the episode work. Here's a fun one. chunkylover53@aol.com. That's Homer's email address, as revealed in a 2003 episode called The Computer Wore Menace Shoes. Now, the joke would have been small enough on its own, but the writer of the episode, Matt Selman, did something clever before the broadcast. He registered the email address. He created an actual functioning AOL account at chunkylover53@aol.com. He set up an autoresponder. The episode aired. Within minutes of the address appearing on screen, the inbox filled to capacity. Thousands of viewers had paused the screen, read the address, and sent emails. The autoresponder fired off a generic Homer-themed reply to each one for a few hours before AOL's servers gave up. The account was eventually shut down because of the volume. But for a brief window in 2003, you could actually email Homer Simpson and get a reply back. It is, I think, one of the smartest pieces of interactive comedy in the show's history. Most shows can't pull off real-world stunts like that without it feeling forced. This one felt entirely natural. Now, the banned episodes. I want to be careful here, because some episodes have been pulled and restored and pulled again, and the status of any given episode shifts over time depending on what's happening in the world. The City of New York versus Homer Simpson is the most famous example. It's a Season 9 episode originally aired in 1997 in which Homer has to travel to New York City to retrieve his car, which has been impounded at the World Trade Center. The episode features the Twin Towers prominently. After the September 11th attacks in 2001, the episode was pulled from syndication. It came back eventually, but in two forms. Some prints simply edited out the line, They put all the jerks in Tower 1, which the writers themselves later admitted was, in retrospect, a line they regretted. Other prints cut whole scenes set at the towers, which made the episode largely incoherent and surprisingly short. The original uncut version exists on the Season 9 DVD, with a commentary track in which the writers discuss exactly how the episode has aged. Stark Raving Dad, the Michael Jackson episode, was pulled in 2019 as we covered earlier. That one is gone for good. Brief callback only. Blame It on Lisa, the Season 13 episode where the family travels to Rio de Janeiro, was temporarily pulled in Brazil after Brazilian officials complained that the episode portrayed the country negatively. The episode is currently available again, but the dispute was real for a while. There's also the Homer strangling Bart situation, which is a more recent piece of canon management. The visual gag of Homer angrily wrapping his hands around Bart's neck and yelling, "Why, you little," has been a recurring joke since the very first season. It is, when you stop to think about it, a depiction of a father physically assaulting his child as a comedy bit. In 2024, after a Season 35 episode appeared to deliberately move away from the gag, there was discussion online about whether the strangling joke was being retired. The executive producer James L. Brooks immediately and firmly denied any change in policy. His exact statement was, "Don't think for a second we're changing anything." So the strangling joke is officially still part of the show. The episode that appeared to retire, it was apparently a one-off moment of character development rather than a permanent shift. Whether that holds across future seasons is something we'll only know in time, and those banned episodes aren't the only production decisions that look strange from the outside. The show has, over its run, made dozens of small choices that quietly shape the canon in ways most viewers never notice, which is, I think, what we should walk through next. Let me start this one with a story I think doesn't get told enough, which is the Alf Clausen story. Alf Clausen was the composer for The Simpsons for 27 years. From Season 2 onward, he was the man writing the music. Every episode score, every original song, every comedic underscore, every Springfield jingle, every musical parody was Alf Clausen. He won 5 Annie Awards specifically for his work on the show. He was nominated for and won multiple Emmys. The musical identity of the show, that mix of orchestral swell and lounge jazz and Broadway-style comedy numbers, was largely his sensibility. In 2017, after 27 years, the show fired him. It was a cost-cutting measure by the producer's admission. They told him they wanted a different musical direction, which is the kind of polite phrase that usually means the budget needs to come down. Clausen was 76 years old at the time. He'd been on the show longer than most of its viewers had been alive. He sued for age discrimination. The case eventually settled, or was dismissed in ways that I won't get into here, but the broader effect was that the man who had defined the sound of The Simpsons for nearly 3 decades was gone. There's a quiet, slightly sad part of this story. Clausen used to come into the orchestra recording sessions with the full score written out, conduct the musicians live, and capture the music in real time. The Simpsons was, for years, one of the few shows in primetime television to use a full orchestra recording every week. Most cartoons use synthesizers and digital instruments because they're cheaper. Clausen insisted on real strings, real horns, real percussion, and the producers paid for it because the music made the show feel cinematic in ways that the animation alone couldn't quite achieve. When he was fired, that whole tradition went with him. The show now uses different composers and a more synthesizer-driven approach. It sounds fine, it just doesn't sound the same. If you go back and watch any of the great musical episodes of the show, you can hear what Clausen built. There's an episode called Streetcar Named Marge, where Marge stars in a community theater production of a musical called Oh, Streetcar. The songs in that episode are full Broadway pastiche, with proper orchestration, with comedic precision in the lyrics. It's the kind of thing that even now holds up against the best musical comedy on television. Clausen wrote the music. Ken Keeler, the math doctorate writer, wrote the lyrics. The episode won the Emmy for Outstanding Original Music and Lyrics for the song We Put the Spring in Springfield in 1997. The next year, the show won the same Emmy again for a song called You're Checkin' In from an episode called The City of New York versus Homer Simpson. That song is performed by a soap opera character about checking into a rehab facility. It's a fully orchestrated comedic number. Same Clausen and Keeler team. 2 consecutive Emmys for original song. That tells you something about how seriously the show took its music in those years. There's a whole musical tradition that Clausen ran through the show. The episodes that contain real songs, not just parody snippets, but actual through-written musical numbers are some of the most beloved in the run. Stop, or My Dog Will Shoot has musical bits. Behind the Laughter has a fake documentary musical structure. The show has done a full Mary Poppins parody, a Music Man parody with Conan's Monorail song, which we covered, a Pirates of Penzance parody. Clausen kept up with every one of these. The man could write in any style. The fact that he was eventually let go for budget reasons is, I think, one of the less proud moments in the show's production history, right? Let me tell you about COVID, because the way the show handled the pandemic is genuinely impressive. In March of 2020, like nearly every other television production in the world, The Simpsons had to figure out how to keep operating with the entire cast unable to come to the studio. Voice acting is traditionally a studio-based job. The actors sit in a booth, the engineer captures the audio, the director gives notes between takes. Remote recording is possible, but it's harder. The audio quality has to be controlled. The actors need professional-grade microphones and quiet recording spaces. Most home setups don't meet that bar. The Simpsons production team built remote recording rigs for every cast member, shipped them to each actor's home, and set up a remote table read system that allowed the cast to work together over video calls. They missed not a single episode. Season 32 went out roughly on schedule. The episodes from that era sound technically almost identical to the pre-pandemic episodes. The cast adapted, the crew adapted, the show kept rolling. The 700th episode of the show, called Manger Things, aired during this period. It was a Christmas special. They produced it almost entirely remotely. 700 episodes is a slightly mind-bending milestone to hit during a global pandemic, and the show hit it without missing a beat, which honestly is a piece of professionalism that doesn't get enough recognition. The show passed another major milestone in April of 2018. With an episode called Forgive and Regret, The Simpsons surpassed Gunsmoke as the longest-running scripted primetime series in American television history. Gunsmoke had held the record for decades at 635 episodes. The Simpsons crossed that line in 2018 and has kept extending the record ever since. There's nothing in the working pipeline that suggests the show is going to stop anytime soon. The episode count keeps climbing. Now, the Tracey Ullman story. This is a piece of legal history that I think a lot of fans don't know about. The Simpsons, as we covered way back at the start of the script, originated as animated shorts on the Tracey Ullman Show. 48 of those shorts aired between 1987 and 1989 before the family spun off into their own series. Tracey Ullman, the person, was not a producer or creator of those shorts. She just hosted the show that the shorts aired on. They were Groening's creation, produced by Brooks and Sam Simon and others. In 1990, after The Simpsons had become a massive hit, Tracey Ullman sued Fox. Her argument was that her show had given The Simpsons their start, and she therefore deserved a percentage of the profits from The Simpsons going forward. She felt entitled to a piece of the success. The case went through the courts. She lost. The judge ruled that the success of The Simpsons as a standalone series was not legally connected to her hosting of the variety show where the characters debuted. She had no creative claim on the characters. The shorts had been Groening's. The show that came from them was Groening's, Brooks's, and Simon's. Ullman got nothing. The lawsuit is largely forgotten now, but it set an interesting legal precedent about character ownership in early television animation. It also explains, I think, why Tracey Ullman is rarely brought up in discussions of the show's history. The fight made the relationship awkward, and the show's official storytelling tends to skip past her contribution entirely. Which is, in fairness, accurate to her legal contribution. She wasn't part of the creative process, but she was part of the marketing window through which the family first reached American audiences, and I think that's worth acknowledging quietly, even if her legal case didn't have merit. Right, here's one I genuinely love. In 2009, the GPS company TomTom hired Dan Castellaneta to record a full set of Homer Simpson voice directions for their navigation systems. Customers could download the Homer voice and have it tell them when to turn left, when to turn right, when they'd missed an exit. The actual lines were a mix of standard GPS phrases delivered in character, turn left in 200 meters, and small Homerisms thrown in as bonus content. The Homer GPS voice was downloaded, according to TomTom, 128,500 times in the United States alone within months of release. That accounted for, by some reports at the time, more than 40% of GPS devices in the world that were running custom voice packs. It was the single most popular non-default voice the company had ever offered. People genuinely wanted to drive around with Homer Simpson telling them where to go. The thing I find most charming about this is the level of commitment to the bit. Castellaneta didn't just record the basic directional phrases, he recorded variations. He recorded reactions to common driving scenarios. He recorded the kind of frustrated mutterings Homer would produce if you missed a turn. The whole package was a properly designed piece of voice work treated by both Castellaneta and TomTom as a real creative project rather than a cheap brand crossover. Most GPS voice packs of the era were perfunctory. This one was, by all accounts, properly funny. Let me talk briefly about the Hollywood Walk of Fame star because it's a fun piece of trivia. On the 14th of January 2000, the Simpson family received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. The star is located at 701 Hollywood Boulevard. It's there now. You can go visit it if you're ever in Los Angeles. The Simpsons were, at the time, the first animated family to receive a Walk of Fame star. Animated characters had received stars before, but they'd all been individual characters: Mickey Mouse, Snoopy, Bugs Bunny. The Simpsons got a single star for the whole family, all 5 of them on the same nameplate. It is, in the small bureaucracy of Hollywood honor, a slightly unusual entry. 5 names on 1 star, all of them fictional, none of them voiced by anyone listed on the star. The show's production budget, by 2011 reporting, was around $5 million per episode. That sounds like a lot, but it's actually quite modest compared to live-action prestige drama of the same era. Premium cable shows like Mad Men or Breaking Bad or Game of Thrones were spending similar or higher figures per episode at the time, despite using real actors and real locations. The Simpsons keeps its budget relatively contained because the animation, while labor-intensive, is centralized and predictable. There's no on-location shooting, there's no celebrity actor salaries for principal cast members in the live-action sense. The money goes mostly to the voice cast, the writers, the animators, and the music. It's a fairly lean operation for a show that produces this much content. The show has won 2 Peabody Awards. The first was in 1996, recognizing the show for providing exceptional animation and stinging social satire. It was the first animated series ever to receive a Peabody. The second was in 2020, an institutional award marking the show's 30th year. The Peabody is, in case anyone hasn't heard of it, one of the most prestigious awards in American broadcasting, given for excellence in television and radio. It's more highbrow than the Emmys. Winning 2 is genuinely a big deal. Time magazine named The Simpsons the greatest television series of the 20th century. That was in 1999. The Simpsons was, at that point, only 10 years old. Time was prepared to call a 10-year-old animated comedy the best TV show of an entire century. The show then went on to spend another 26 years on the air, so the magazine's call has, retrospectively, looked pretty solid. There's a quieter milestone I want to mention. In December of 2025, Disney announced that The Simpsons had surpassed 1 billion hours of streaming on Disney Plus during the calendar year. 1 billion hours in a single year. On a single platform, that's not even the cumulative total since the show launched on streaming. That's just 1 year of Disney Plus viewing. To put that in perspective, 1 billion hours is roughly 114,000 years of human attention. That figure includes the always-on 24/7 Simpsons stream that Disney launched in March of 2025, which plays the show in continuous rotation as a kind of background channel, but it also includes a colossal amount of regular on-demand viewing. The show has, in its 3rd decade on streaming, somehow gotten more popular rather than less, which is a thing very few television programs can claim. The 24/7 stream itself is one of those things I think will look, in 50 years, like an obvious idea that took a strange amount of time to happen. Disney took the entire library of The Simpsons, all 767 episodes that were available at launch, and turned them into a never-ending stream that runs all day, every day on Disney+. You can drop in at any point and there's a Simpsons episode playing. The shuffle algorithm picks them, the show plays, the next episode starts. It's exactly the experience a lot of fans were already creating for themselves with the streaming library on autoplay. Disney just formalized it. The show has also generated, on the merchandising side, a properly enormous amount of revenue. Estimates put the lifetime merchandising business in the billions of dollars. Action figures, t-shirts, video games, theme park attractions, soundtrack albums, collectible figurines, board games, dolls, fast food promotions. The early 90s Bartmania wave alone, with the bootleg Black Bart t-shirts and the legitimate underachiever and proud of it merchandise, generated hundreds of millions of dollars in a few short years. Schools banned the shirts, parents complained, the merchandise kept selling. One last quick thing. The Simpsons has been parodied and referenced by basically every other major animated show that has aired in the past 30 years. Family Guy, South Park, Rick and Morty, Bob's Burgers, all of them owe a structural debt to The Simpsons. The Family Guy crossover in 2014 was an hour-long episode that aired on Family Guy and saw the two families meet for real. South Park has done multiple parodies. Bob's Burgers exists structurally as a kind of warm-hearted descendant of the show. The Simpsons created the template for the primetime animated family comedy, and every successor has either honored it or rebelled against it, but none of them have ignored it, right? Let's wander into the last section, where I want to talk about the bigger world around the show. The movie, the theme parks, the records, the future, all the things that grew out of Springfield and into the wider world. Some television shows are just shows. You watch them, they end, you go on with your life. And then there's a smaller category of shows where the actual television program is, after a while, almost the smallest part of what the thing has become. The Simpsons is firmly in that second category and has been for about 25 years now. Springfield is not just a place on a screen, it's a theme park area, it's a video game, it's a film, it's a 24/7 streaming channel, it's a comic book imprint, it's a chunk of merchandise that's been generating revenue since the show began. It's a fictional place that has more physical infrastructure dedicated to it than most real American towns. Let me start with the movie, because that's the most obvious extension of the show into a different format. The Simpsons movie came out on the 27th of July, 2007. It was, by that point, 18 years overdue. The producers had been talking about a feature film since basically the early 90s. We mentioned earlier that the Camp Krusty episode was originally pitched as a potential movie plot before it got squeezed back down to a half hour. That was in season 4, around 1992. So the idea of a Simpsons film was sitting around in the writer's room for 15 years before they actually made one. The reasons for the delay are a mix of scheduling, budget, and the fairly understandable fear that a bad movie would damage the show. When they finally committed to it, the production approach was unusual. The director was David Silverman, a longtime Simpsons animation veteran. The writing was split between 11 different people. That's not 11 writers in the standard Hollywood committee sense, where 1 or 2 writers do the heavy lifting and the rest get credits. It was 11 people working on different sections of the story, then stitching the sections together, then rewriting collectively. James L. Brooks, Matt Groening, Al Jean, Mike Scully, George Meyer, David Merkin, Mike Rice, Matt Selman, John Swartzwelder, John Vitti, and Ian Maxtone Graham. All 11 names are on the final script. The approach was meant to capture what made the show work in the writer's room, which is the collective sensibility, the room rewriting and rewriting until the jokes click. They reproduced the room process at feature length. The plot, in case you've not seen it, is that Homer accidentally pollutes Springfield's lake by dumping his pet pig's waste into it. The contamination is severe enough that the EPA intervenes, and the EPA, led by an unhinged villain named Russ Cargill, voiced by Albert Brooks, encloses the entire town under a giant glass dome to contain the pollution. The family escapes the dome, ends up in Alaska, and Homer has to make the journey back to save Springfield. It's, structurally, a slightly enlarged Simpsons episode with higher stakes and a longer running time, which was exactly the point. The movie made roughly $527 million at the global box office on a production budget of around $75 million. That's a properly massive return. It was the 8th highest grossing film of 2007. It was, at the time, the 2nd highest grossing traditionally animated film of all time, behind only The Lion King. Hans Zimmer composed the score, which is one of those facts that I always find slightly surreal. Hans Zimmer, the man who scored Inception and The Dark Knight and Gladiator, wrote the music for a Simpsons film. He approached it with absolute seriousness. The score is lovely. It treats the family with the same musical dignity Zimmer would treat any other piece of his work. The film received an 87% on Rotten Tomatoes and an 80 on Metacritic, which is genuinely strong for a long-delayed film adaptation of a 30-year-old TV show. Most adaptations of beloved properties get savaged by critics. This one didn't. The general critical consensus was that the producers had managed the very difficult trick of making the movie feel like the show rather than feel like a longer, different thing. There is a sequel to the Simpsons movie scheduled to come out. As of where we are now, it's set for the 3rd of September 2027. The original release date was the 23rd of July 2027, but it got pushed back a few weeks. The title and the plot are not really publicly known yet. There's been almost no marketing. The production is presumably underway, but the details are being kept under wraps in the way Hollywood now keeps everything under wraps. 20 years between the two films is a fairly slow turnaround for a studio franchise, but the original took 15 years to make in the first place, so the pacing fits the historical rhythm. By the time you hear me say goodnight at the end of this, the sequel will probably be most of the way through its animation pipeline. There's a smaller piece of Simpsons theatrical history that I want to mention because almost nobody talks about it. In 2012, the show produced a short film called The Longest Daycare. It's about 5 minutes long. It features Maggie Simpson at a daycare center where she's separated into the gifted children's room with a single dim child, while a butterfly she's trying to protect gets stalked by a sadistic toddler named Gerald. The whole short has no dialogue. Just Maggie's expressions, the actions of the scene, and a wordless musical score. It screened in cinemas before the Pixar-distributed film Ice Age, Continental Drift. It was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Animated Short Film at the 85th Academy Awards. The Simpsons, the show that absolutely none of us would have guessed was going to be a serious contender for an Oscar, was nominated for one in 2013. It didn't win. The award went to a different short called Paperman. But the nomination itself is, I think, the most underrated piece of recognition the show has ever received. The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences looked at 5 minutes of Maggie Simpson trying to save a butterfly and decided it was one of the 5 best animated short films released that year. That tells you something about how seriously this property has been taken at the very top of the industry. Right, let's go to Florida or California, the theme park stuff. The Simpsons ride opened at Universal Studios Florida and Universal Studios Hollywood in May of 2008. It's a motion simulator ride, the kind where you sit in a cabin that tilts and shakes and bumps while a film plays on a screen in front of you. The conceit is that you're visiting a fictional, Krusty-themed amusement park called Krustyland, and the ride goes wrong and Sideshow Bob shows up as the villain, and you get chased around Springfield in a runaway car. It's silly. It's exactly the right kind of silly for the property. The ride replaced an earlier Universal attraction called Back to the Future. The ride, which had been a major Universal property for nearly 2 decades. The decision to remove the Back to the Future ride and replace it with a Simpsons ride was a fairly significant statement about which franchise was, at the time, considered the bigger cultural asset. The Simpsons won, the DeLorean lost. The transition involved keeping most of the existing physical ride hardware and just changing the film and the theming, which is, again, the cheaper and smarter approach. A few years later, in 2013, Universal expanded the Simpsons' presence into a full-themed area at both parks. Springfield, USA, or Springfield, home of the Simpsons, depending on which signage you read. The themed area is essentially a recreation of a chunk of Springfield town, with working restaurants and shops modeled after the locations from the show. Krusty Burger is real. You can buy a Krusty Burger. Moe's Tavern is real. You can buy a Duff beer there, although the Duff is, a regular American beer with a Simpsons label on it. Lard Lad Donuts is real. You can buy an enormous pink frosted donut shaped like the giant one Lard Lad holds in the show. It's properly committed. There's a Kang and Kodo's Twirl and Hurl ride, which is a low-thrill spinning carousel themed around the show's recurring alien characters. There's a parade. There are character meet and greets where actors in Homer and Marge costumes interact with park guests. The whole area is, in a real sense, the closest thing the world has to an actual physical Springfield. If you live near either Universal Park and you want to drink a Duff beer at Moe's Tavern, you can. The simulation is reasonably committed. Now, the video games. There have been an enormous number of Simpsons video games over the years, going back to the arcade days. The 1991 Konami arcade game, just called The Simpsons, was a beat-em-up where you played as one of the family members fighting through Springfield to rescue Maggie from Mr. Burns and Smithers. It was an enormous arcade hit in the early 90s. It was also one of the few Simpsons games to use animation that closely resembled the show's actual style, because Konami licensed the production assets directly. Then there were dozens of console games across the 90s and 2000s. Bart vs. the Space Mutants on the NES was famously, almost punishingly difficult. The Simpsons Road Rage in 2001 was a racing game that was, by various accounts, a fairly direct copy of the Crazy Taxi formula. Some of these games are remembered fondly. Most of them are remembered as the kind of licensed mediocrity that defined a lot of 7th-generation gaming. And then there's The Simpsons Hit and Run. This one deserves its own paragraph. The Simpsons Hit and Run came out in 2003. It's a GTA-style open-world game where you drive around Springfield, do missions for various characters, smash up cars, collect items, and uncover a conspiracy involving aliens and Buzz Cola. The game is, in many ways, a fairly direct parody of Grand Theft Auto 3, but adapted carefully to The Simpsons' tone and visual style. The whole thing is funny. The voice acting is the actual cast. The script is sharp. Springfield is rendered as a properly explorable three-dimensional space, with all the famous locations sitting where they ought to. For reasons I don't entirely understand, but that I think have something to do with the specific texture of nostalgia produced by playing an open-world game set in your favorite TV show as a teenager in 2003, Hit and Run has become one of the most beloved licensed video games of its generation. There is a sustained, persistent online campaign by fans demanding a remaster. The campaign has been running for years. There are petitions, there are fan-made remasters that use the original assets running in modern engines. The original developers, Radical Entertainment, have publicly acknowledged the demand. The remaster has never been formally announced because the licensing rights are complicated, and the studio that made it no longer exists in the same form. But the affection for the original game is, in the licensed game world, basically unmatched. It's the GoldenEye 64 of its era. People are extremely attached. There's a more recent Simpsons gaming moment that I want to flag because it's strange and modern. In 2025, Fortnite ran an entire Simpsons-themed season. The Springfield Island map became playable. Original animated shorts were produced as marketing content. Players could unlock Homer and Bart and Lisa and various other characters as skins. The whole crossover ran for several months. The fact that The Simpsons in 2025 was still considered a desirable franchise for the world's biggest interactive entertainment platform to integrate with tells you something about how the property has aged. Fortnite collaborates with brands that have current cultural pull. The Simpsons is apparently still that brand. While we're on merchandise and the broader empire, let me talk briefly about the Simpsons Sing the Blues album. We touched on the Michael Jackson connection earlier, so I won't dwell on the Do the Bartman story again, but the album itself is worth a moment. It came out in December of 1990. It sold over 2 million copies in the United States alone. For an album of comedy songs performed by cartoon characters, that is, even by 1990 standards, a properly enormous number. The album was followed by Songs in the Key of Springfield in 1997, the Yellow Album in 1998, Go Simpsonic with The Simpsons in 1999, and various other compilation and soundtrack releases over the years. The Simpsons has a properly developed musical catalog. The discography is more substantial than a lot of working bands. The comic book situation is its own little world. Matt Groening founded a publishing imprint called Bongo Comics in 1993 specifically to publish Simpsons comics. The main Simpsons comics title ran from 1993 to 2018, producing 245 issues. There were also Bartman comics, where Bart became a superhero. There were Treehouse of Horror anthology comics every year. There was Radioactive Man, a fake superhero comic in-universe that Bongo published as a real comic in the real world, which is a properly delicious piece of metafiction. The whole imprint was, in publishing terms, a fairly serious operation. It wound down in 2018 as the broader comic book industry consolidated, but for 25 years, you could walk into a comic shop and buy fresh Simpsons material month after month. That's an absurd run. The book situation is similar. There have been multiple official Simpsons reference books, including a series of episode guides that became standard reference material for fans. Mike Rice wrote a memoir called Springfield Confidential about his time on the show, which I mentioned earlier. There's an unofficial history book by John Ortved called The Simpsons, an uncensored, unauthorized history, which is genuinely good. Various academic books have been written about the show, treating it as a subject of media studies and cultural criticism. The University Press of Mississippi alone has published, by my count, at least 3 different scholarly volumes on it. The show has become a legitimate academic subject. People write PhD theses about it. Now, the future. Let me end this section with where things stand. The show was renewed through season 40 in an announcement made on the 2nd of April 2025. That renewal, described in the trade press as a mega deal with Disney, takes the show into the late 2020s at minimum. There has been no cancellation announcement ever in the show's history. The Simpsons has been in continuous production since December 1989 without a single interrupted season. That's a record nobody else in television comes close to. Other long-running shows have taken hiatus years, gone off the air and come back, changed networks. The Simpsons has just kept going. Same network, same studio, same general production rhythm, season after season. Matt Selman, who's been a writer on the show for nearly 30 years, is now the sole showrunner from season 38 forward. Al Jean, who ran the show for nearly 2 decades, has moved to a consulting role. The transition has been slow and respectful. Selman has been gradually taking over more episodes since around season 23, with full primary showrunner duties since around season 33. The current era of the show is sometimes described as a kind of late career renaissance, with more format experimentation, more emotional storytelling, more willingness to break the fourth wall. The season 36 finale, which aired in May of 2025, contained a flash forward in which Marge Simpson dies in the future, with a brief cemetery scene that surprised viewers genuinely. I'll say something about that finale because I think it's worth saying. The producers and Julie Kavner have both stated that the death sequence is a flash forward, not a permanent change. Marge is, in the present-day timeline of the show, alive and well. But the willingness of the show to even gesture at the mortality of one of its core characters after a very long stretch of effective immortality is a kind of artistic statement. The show is allowing itself to acknowledge that time is passing, that the family is, in some sense, aging inside the timeline, that the comfort of permanence can be disturbed without being destroyed. There's something quietly moving about a show that's been on the air longer than most of its viewers' marriages, allowing itself a moment of grief. The episode aired, and the internet briefly lost its mind. The clarification followed. The show went back to its normal rhythm. But the moment exists, and in some ways, the fact that the show is now confident enough to do something like that, while also confident enough to clarify that it isn't a permanent change, tells you everything you need to know about where it sits in the cultural landscape. The Simpsons can play with its own mortality because it knows it doesn't have to actually die. Right? I think that's about it for this section. Let's wind down for a minute and then I'll let you sleep. Right, so that's about 120 details from The Simpsons, give or take. I didn't keep a strict count as we went, but it's somewhere in that range. If you stayed awake for all of them, honestly, I'm impressed. If you fell asleep somewhere around the fax machine story or the Conan O'Brien section, that's exactly the desired outcome, and I take it as a small professional success. A few things I want to mention before we wrap up properly, just because they're on my mind. The first is that we didn't cover everything. We didn't really. There are entire categories of Simpsons trivia that I could happily talk about for another 3 hours. The sideshow Bob Rake gag, where the show deliberately makes a joke go on too long until it loops back around to being funny again. The steamed ham sequence from 22 short films about Springfield, which has become its own cultural object on the internet, with thousands of fan-made remix versions and YouTube tributes. The worst episode ever comic book guy template that quietly defined a generation of internet criticism. The early 2000s Tracy Ullman re-release controversies. The fan theories that take the show too seriously, of which there are hundreds. The careful tradition of how Treehouse of Horror chooses which famous horror films to parody each year. The fact that the show invented or popularized the phrase 2 thumbs up being used sarcastically. None of those made it in tonight. There just wasn't time. Maybe in another video. There's a particular kind of fact that I find I always end up cutting from these videos, which is the fact that has too much context attached. Take the Who Shot Mr. Burns cliffhanger we mentioned earlier. I gave you the basic story, but I didn't really get into the whole summer of 1995 around it. The way the Las Vegas casinos took bets, The way grocery stores in some places put cardboard cutouts of burns near the entrance with signs saying, "Help us find the shooter." The way the producers were apparently genuinely paranoid about leaks and used different writers' rooms for different fake endings to keep everyone honest. The cliffhanger was a properly enormous cultural moment that I gave maybe 2 paragraphs to. The full story is its own video. Same with the early Bartmania era. The phase in the early 90s when Bart Simpson was, briefly, the single most marketable character in American culture. When pirated Bart shirts outsold the official ones at swap meets. When Bart-themed pencils were banned from American classrooms. When a fake Black Bart bootleg shirt aesthetic became its own street fashion movement that influenced hip-hop graphics for years afterward. That whole period is a whole sociological event that we only glanced at. It was bigger than I made it sound. I think one of the reasons the show works as something you can fall asleep to, by the way, is that it doesn't need to be paid close attention to. The texture of it is so familiar by now, especially if you grew up with it, that hearing the voices and the music and the cadence of Springfield is just comforting. The show isn't asking anything of you. It's been there for 36 years. It will be there tomorrow. There's something quietly settling about that in a world where most things demand more from us than we'd like to give. I think that's probably why we can't let it go. Not the writers or the producers or the network. Us, the audience. We can't quite walk away from this show because it represents something rare and slightly precious, which is a piece of culture that has just kept going. Most of the things we loved as children are gone now or are some commercial reboot of themselves. The Simpsons is just still there. The same people are mostly still making it. The voices are mostly the same. Bart is still 10, Lisa is still 8, Maggie is still sucking on her pacifier and refusing to grow up. The town hasn't moved. The power plant is still poisoning the river. Everything is, in the way only a cartoon can manage, exactly where you left it. You can go away for a decade and come back and Homer is still Homer. He's still strangling Bart. He's still working at the plant. He's still going to Moe's every evening. None of it has been taken from you, and in a small but real way, that's a kind of gift that television almost never gives us. Most shows ask you to watch a story that begins and ends. The Simpsons is asking you to live in a place. The place has rules. The place has people you know. The place will absorb whatever current events are happening in the actual world and will reflect them back at you in animated form by next season at the latest. The place is the comfort. The place is what we keep coming back to. I think that's enough of that. I don't want to get too sentimental because the show would absolutely make fun of me for it. If you've made it this far and you're still listening, thank you for spending this much time with me. These long sleep videos are a labor of love, and I genuinely enjoy making them. If they're working for you, the best thing you can do is keep listening. Maybe try one of the other ones on the channel tomorrow night. There's probably something there that interests you. I do these regularly. I take my time. I try to be honest about what I don't know, and I always assume that some percentage of you will fall asleep partway through, which is, again, the entire point. If you're awake and you happen to remember something from tonight that you want to tell someone tomorrow, the bit I'd recommend bringing up at a casual social moment is the booth. The John Swartzwelder booth. The story of a man who bought a piece of restaurant furniture because the law made it impossible for him to smoke in public and he wasn't willing to change his writing habits. It's a great story to tell at a dinner party. People always look at you like you're making it up. You're not. He really did it. The booth still exists somewhere, presumably in whatever house he lives in now. Or you could bring up the fax machine. The Smithers fax machine color mistake is, in my experience, a story that always lands. People love a "they couldn't afford to fix it" production story. The fact that one of the most beloved supporting characters in television history was the wrong skin color for an entire episode because a piece of paper moved while it was going through a fax machine in 1989 is, I think, a properly delightful piece of trivia. Or you could bring up the Krusty thing. The fact that Krusty was originally supposed to be Homer in disguise. People are usually quite startled by that one because once you see it, you can't unsee it. The shapes are too similar. The voices are the same actor. The whole character makes a different kind of sense once you know. Any of those would do. Pick one, use it well. All right, I think I've kept you long enough. There's no big lesson at the end of this. I'm not going to tell you something profound about life. The show has been on for a very long time, and it's still on, and it's going to keep being on. And tomorrow you'll get up and have a normal day, and maybe at some point in the afternoon, someone will say something that reminds you of an episode, and you'll smile a little. That's what this show is for. That's what it's been for a long time now. Just a small, reliable source of warmth that's always running somewhere. If you're already asleep, sleep well. If you're still drifting, drift comfortably. If you're properly awake, I hope you got somewhere comfortable to be. I'll be back in another video soon with another long, quiet walk through something I find interesting. Same pace, same voice, same idea. We'll just sit there together and I'll talk and you can do whatever you need to do. Good night, by the way, whichever Springfield you're falling asleep in.